for particular notes.
Recording.
Okay, we're recording now. And then finally, there are no fire alarms planned today, so if you hear the fire alarm, make your way outside. Follow the fire exit signs. And before we get started, I had two big thank yous. First of all, to RSEcon. So the reason we hold this meeting, which is specific to UKTEs, as part of RSEcon, is simply because it saves a lot of the admin and stuff. We can basically go to the RSE committee, say, we want to run a satellite meeting, they take care of the room bookings and booking the catering. So that's very helpful for us. And a very big thanks to Dare UK for sponsoring this event. So the reason this event is completely free, including lunch, is thanks to Dare UK paying for everything. And I believe it's Fergus who signs up on it. Thank you. So as you may know, we currently have 5 UKTE co-chairs. Just to emphasize, we're always looking for more people to help out with this group. It's very much a grassroots community group. At the moment, it's all pretty much entirely voluntary. So if you're interested in helping out either formally as a co-chair or informally, get in touch with us. We currently have 5 co-chairs, Madeline, who's online, Balint, David, myself, and Pete Barnsley. So unfortunately, Pete Barnsley couldn't make it today, which is a shame, but he was really keen. He was very instrumental in setting today's agenda. He actually did most of the way putting slides together. But unfortunately, he had to pull out at the very last minute, which is a bit of a shame. But feel free to thank him if you do see him. So we were going to hopefully try and get a printed handouts for a few people. Unfortunately, we had an issue with printing. But we do have a link to this document on the HackMD. And I say, if anyone has trouble with HackMD, we can probably arrange to get it printed. We just need a USB stick, which unfortunately none of us have because it's quite a... Oh. All right, to get started, I think most people found out how to use Slido, as you have seen from the first questions while you were coming in. But now we have a first proper question. So if everyone goes to that event, which David is going to, I don't remember how to do this. So I need to share. Yep. I was going to try to work out whether you have to share it and then. Give it a second. Well, some people already found it, which is quite cool. So what's the role in interesting TREs? Just put a couple of words. Okay, so we've got a lot of TRE developers and providers here. And it's also great to see we've got a lot of people outside development, especially on the funding side, on the data management side, information governance.
We have people doing everything.
Yep. Yeah, and this is really like one of the big strengths of this community. So although when we kicked off this group 2 years ago, it was very much focused on just research software engineers, we quickly pivoted to, well, basically everything in TREs, simply because people were asking for it. And this is kind of one advantage of a grassroots group, like we can really adapt to what people want. And I really like to emphasize, although we're up here presenting today, we're not the ones deciding what the community is interested in. We basically take feedback from what you want to talk about. So if you've got anything you think we're missing, or if there's something you want to do, either formally or just like informally, or you want our help in setting up a subgroup or something, always just let us know. Should go on to the next one.
So next, which one? Slido?
Yeah, didn't have another one. Yeah, next slide, if there's one. So here's a bit of a question which might take a bit more time to think about. So what would you most like to do with TREs that you can't do at the moment? So it could be something small, could be something sort of really big and grand. Okay, so there's a lot of federation, which is good because that's one of our main topics coming up. Yep, single admission process related to effectively federated IG or some sort of considered IG is one of the questions we're going to try and get you to answer later. And a lot more federation. Better quality data, something that everyone always wants. Yep. Yeah, and a few people have mentioned AI, which I think everyone probably knows is quite a big area at the moment. Yep, and it's great to see patients public being brought up, because that is something that is really important, especially in the UK. And I'm pleased to say, I think it's something that the UK actually does really well, especially compared to some other countries. Less bureaucracy, low cost as always. Networks. Automatic IG would be really cool if you can do it. But I think it's clear to say federation is a thing people most really feel strongly about, which is good because we do have a panel discussion and some keynotes coming up on it. Okay, so actually, I think the good thing is that most of these are probably things that have been in people's minds before. I guess they're probably not new to most people, but it is good to see that a lot of people are thinking the same way, and including the funders.
Nothing's fine.
Cool. Yep. Let's go back to the slides then.
They should be up already.
Should they? Oh, sorry, just need to remember how to use tech here. Okay, so you've probably seen this slide before, but it pretty much just encompasses what I've just been saying about this being a grassroots community. So when we came together, was it about 2 years ago? It was just a group of 30 people, no agenda. It was literally a Slack message saying, does anyone want to come to this conference, want to come into RCCon, want to talk about TREs? And 30 people turned up. And since then, we've really grown. I say we've expanded beyond RSEs to cover literally everyone. I mean, you saw that from the first Slido. And the aims of this community are really initially to just share knowledge. So with the wide range of roles in this community, everyone's working on TREs. Everyone knows that up until a few years ago, there were about 100 TREs in the UK, but it was very siloed. People often didn't talk to each other. And this community has really been a great way to sort of bring everyone together. So that's, and that's just about basically sharing knowledge. But now we kind of wanted to sort of move beyond that. So this just gives you an idea of how we've grown since we started 2 years ago. So initially in Newcastle, we had 30, 40 people. In Swansea, we had roughly about 100 people coming in person. So bear in mind, Swansea, to be honest, I think it's fair to say it's not the easiest place in the world to get to. And to have 100 people coming up there was pretty amazing. On the graph on there is basically the number of mailing list subscribers we've got, which is how we count UK TRE members, because we don't really have any more format at the moment. And you can say, as of today, we've had over 300 members on the list now. We've got over 100 different organisations, and over the past year, we've set up working groups, which I'll talk a bit more about in a bit. And as you can say, took a picture at photo at Swansea last year, where it was nice and sunny, a bit nicer than today. So what have we done? So what have we done in the past year? Well, as you may or may not know, so DARE gave us roughly £40,000 worth of funding. Some of the things we spent are really on beefing up our community processes. So you can think about our UK TREs. Initially, 2 years ago, it's a bit of a baby, a child running around. We weren't entirely sure what we're doing. But really, over the past 2 years, we've really been growing up, almost turning into either teenager, maybe almost an adult now. And part of that is really solidifying what we want to do, how we run ourselves, what we stand for. And that's really what the community management working group's been sort of doing. So over the past year, we're setting up a new website. It's not quite ready yet, but we can show the preview in a bit. And we've set up some Slack channels, which hopefully everyone's familiar with. If you're not, we'll send some links. As part of that, we've also set up 7 working groups. So as part of becoming more professional, we want to keep our sort of grassroots vibe because it works. We can show that by a number of people who are interested. But we also want to look at saying, how do we harness energy in this room and online to start having more concrete outputs? So, in this sort of slide, I always said, what do you wish TREs could do? How can we actually go about tackling that, whether with or without funding? And our idea was to start coming up with some, say, working groups. So we currently have 7 of them. We have a citizens agency, which is looking at what sort of control do the public and patients have over their data in a TRE? At the moment, typically you have a PIE outreach as part of research. But Pete Barnsley, who unfortunately couldn't make it today, is really starting to look at, well, what can you do? Can you actually give, say, people more control over the data? For example, to begin with, that might be saying they can see where the data is in a TRE. But for example, would you want to extend that to saying actually a patient can say yes or no to a particular research project, that sort of thing? Extending control is really look at federation. So like, do you move data between TREs? Who allows that data to be moved? Do you move in compute? Effectively extending the IG. Potentially controversial one is what's the difference between a secure data environment and a trusted research environment? Is it just something the NHS come up with it? Or actually, is there something, is actually some little fundamental difference between them? Pete has come up with something. If you want to find out more, go into the working group. The glossary working group that Rob Baxter's leading, that we all know this terminology that people use, and I probably don't need to tell you, it'd be a great help if everyone in the TRE community could use the same terminology, or at the very least, agree on a small number of terms, so use things differently. Eddie, put your hand up, do you want to say something? Sorry, very good point. Then, of course, you have SATRA, Standard Architecture for Trusted Research Environments. If you haven't heard of it, the idea is that in the UK, every TRE is at a fundamental level following the very same principles and same architecture. So was it 2 years ago now, I think, or was it a year? DARE funded us a pilot project to say, can we build a standard architecture? The answer is yes, we've got version 1. We know it's definitely not complete. There's a lot more work to do, but at the same time, it's good enough that it's been taken up internationally. And again, if you want to get involved, talk to myself, Chris, James, Robinson, who I can't find over there, and a few other people. We've also got our working group this afternoon, along with other working groups. Funding and sustainability, hopefully self-explanatory. It's like, how do we, we've talked about all the things we want to do. How do we fund it? What's the best way of funding it? Do the funders understand exactly what we need? If not, how do we make the case for them to fund TRE development? And just as importantly, long-term TRE infrastructure. So it's one thing to fund startup or creation of new TRE. One of the big problems, as you may know, in the UK is how do you fund the infrastructure to keep running for 5, 10 years or more? And I think 7th working group is cybersecurity risk. I think Donald might be online. At the moment, just looking at cybersecurity risk in TREs, initially looking at how do you secure containers in a TRE. So you notice that on the slide at the start, someone said they'd actually have containers in TREs. So beyond that, we'll probably expand to cover more areas. But to keep things focused, I think at the moment, still look at just the risk for containers. And one thing that came up about a month or 2 ago is information governance. So basically, I think, well, a lot of people have asked, why don't we have an information governance working group in the UKT? It's a fundamental need. And I said, absolutely. We do have some people who were interested in starting it, but they ran into the issue of, well, to run a working group, actually, you need to spend time on it. Time requires funding. So either the institution needs to donate time, which in a lot of cases isn't possible, or we actually need some sort of core community funding to pay people to just manage the working group. So that's not pay people to actually work in the working group. It's just to pay for the coordination, admin, and so on. But if anyone here is interested in joining an information governance working group, or if they're able to donate the time, come and speak to us, because there's a lot of drive in the community for something like that. So this is just a preview of the new website. So as you've seen our website, you know, okay, it's functional, it's not the easiest to navigate. And as part of the DEAR communities funding we received last year, we pretty much revamped the entire website. So it's almost ready to go live. What we're mainly missing at the moment is copying across the content, but you can see a preview on the left. And on the right, the other thing we've set up is, say, Slack. So initially, we piggybacked on an existing Slack run by the RSE community. But as we changed the focus of the UK TRE community to look at everything related to TREs, we decided we should branch out, launch it on Slack. So that's there. The links will be somewhere on the website. We'll also share them later. So I've already talked about working groups. As I say, we can just go through the end. All of them. And then we should be, and then.
Cheers. Yeah, hi everyone. I wanted to make a bit of a stop on the governance work that Simon has been speaking about, and that has really allowed us to kind of mature for that kid, that young organization that we had into one that is prepared for growth. I think this is something that we have presented on before, especially when the DARE UK funding ended, that was focused on that website. So I will not go into detail. I will not explain every process to you. I cannot even remember it just on the spot, but give you an overview and kind of encourage you to explore it, to use it, because the main principle in which we have based all the governance is just in community participation. And the idea that if someone wants to do something, they can do something unless the rest of the community opposes. So it's based on the principle of lazy consensus. Basically, if you have an initiative, you want to start a working group, you want to participate in a working group, come to us, just do it. What we will do is, now that we are a bit more formalized to allow for growth in a more steady way, we will ask you to prepare a charter and explain to everyone very publicly. So feedback can be shared, so everyone can join, so all voices can be integrated in that. Prepare a charter that is going to be shared with everyone. Then if there's no opposition to that, you will be able to start working. So all of our governance is pretty much based on that. It's based on sharing with the community. Then what we're also preparing is processes for how to have discussions, how to agree on our principles, how to agree on how we work on. And the way that we are going to share all of that is everything is going to be available on that website. Actually, that website is already, you can already navigate to it and find all the principles and all the governance documents that we have been working on. And then on our repository, you will always be able to find community discussions or everything that is up for community review. What I would encourage all of you is to start engaging. All of these principles, all of these governance processes that we have put together, they are a first iteration. Basically, we need to be using them. We need to have participation because that's what they are based on. So basically, since we started those, we formally started working groups. So all working groups currently have their charter and it's up on our website and you can check that. But other than that, we've continued to kind of work on co-chairs meeting every Tuesday and moving things forward. And what we really need to put those processes to the test is everyone participating in them and testing them and see where it doesn't work. So yeah, then I'm going to share just this keyboard. Okay, so this is an example when we started doing the whole governance processes again a few months ago. One of the things that we wanted to do were kind of not established because community principles were already established, but we want to, thanks to the Newcastle declaration from 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Yeah, 2 years ago. And basically, did we need a new structure since we grew? This was a constant question that we were getting. Yet, when we prepared them, we found that there was no consensus. Basically, we had pending conversations. There were yeah, we were doing a proposal. There were some concerns about how we were doing it. This is a clear example of something that we then, as co-chairs, decided to kind of stop and make clear that there's a pending conversation to be had here, and until it's resolved, we will kind of not produce this document. That said, I would encourage everyone to participate in this conversation that today and taking the opportunity to kind of draw attention to it and go back to it. I will not go into detail on what it is and what it says, because I think that deserves its own time, probably its own set of sessions and asynchronous participation, either through GitHub or through other means that we have prepared so everyone can access, so everyone that is not comfortable with GitHub can also participate. But I wanted to share that as kind of a nice example of how our governance principles are working. And the other is the working groups, which are already established, are already working, and yeah, they're looking promising. Oh, and another clarification that I think I will make because it's confusing. The community management working group meet every Tuesday, and everyone is welcome to join that and just help us shape the community, prepare these events. That's not the same as the co-chairs, even if we are the same people in both rooms. The co-chairs are kind of just a figure that we have for the management team to decide on conversations like this, kind of based on community feedback and community discussion, whether or not a discussion is ready to move on or something can be approved. And we will always be making our decisions based on the discussion and very transparent, so everyone can interrogate them. So same people all the time. That's why you are always seeing the same faces. But actually, community management working group is open to everyone to just join every Tuesday and help us put all of this together. Yeah. Okay, so again, we're on keyword. Simon already mentioned on this information governance is a working group that keeps floating. Everyone wants to do it. No one has the time. Please, if everyone does have the time, we are ready to accept this as a working group. And now to a point that Simon was making, I think that all the governance processes that we have put together, the new website, being able to establish that Slack, to dedicate all that time would not have been possible. I mean, earlier from the support that some of us get from our institutions that allow us to dedicate time to this. Thanks, Kirsty, Martin, for allowing me to spend a lot of time working on this. But also the funding that we got from there for, I think it was 5-6 months, was key to be able to fully turn our attention to this, establish those governance processes, help this community mature, make it prepared for the future, have a nice website, which is an amazing thing to have, something that is ready. It's important. And now that we're back to volunteering work, we are seeing that how that work is always slower. I mean, as Simon was saying, our website just needs content migration. That's all. We still haven't found the proper time to do that because we have other commitments. So core funding is very important for a community to grow. And that's what we want to do with this UKRI Digital Research Technical Professional Skills Network Plus. I'm not responsible for the name of that bid. And it's up to 2 million over 4 years. And I think it's very much, this call is much dedicated to proposals like ours, to communities like ours, to professionalize digital skills, to make communities happen. And that's something that we would love to put a bid for. The deadline is in exactly a month, I think 2nd of October. We already have a summary of what we intend to do with this funding. It's up for everyone to see and to participate on it. Join us in preparing that bid. We are, our idea for it is that we are, there are 2 main areas that we want to work on with this funding and that we think that it would allow us to do. One is to fund the core time and working of this community. continue working on those governance processes, maintain our digital spaces from website, Slack, allows us to do newsletter, kind of provide a better experience all around, kind of the infrastructure work that is needed. But also to be able to buy out this time from working groups. We want working group leads or chairs to be able to dedicate the necessary times that they need to move forward and to kind of produce the outputs, rather than it can be very difficult to balance everything. So we want people to be able to form a working group, have some of their time dedicated formally to it, and then move it forward. And the other aspect of this grant that we would love to work on, and is something that we need to kind of continue developing, is to professionalize further what TREs are and what the TRE professionals are like and what we need. We think that we are all here kind of by happenstance. Each of us have our own pathway in our careers. And suddenly we have all met around this thing called TRE or SDE. But I think we felt a lack of support, of clear materials, of clear skills that we should all share, or that should bridge our different careers or different backgrounds, and kind of get us as speaking the same language, and kind of recognize us and improve the talent retention within TREs, which is also a challenge. So that's something very important that we want to do with this bid. Something that we have to still detail, because honestly, we as co-chairs lack some experience in writing that and in preparing. So this is a very clear call to action for everyone to join us in finalizing this bid, in writing this bid, and we are actually looking forward to partners, both in terms of, well, we need someone to submit this bid to start with. We need a lead organization. We are internally working, some of the organizations within TRE Community. We are working within our institutions to see if we can be that, but there's no resolution at the moment. So if everyone can come up with the institution being able to lead and being kind of the official PI for this, that would be perfect. We need that in order to be able to submit, but also partners in terms of other groups that we will be talking to. I mean, this only works if we are in connection, continue the work that we do in the community and connect with everyone that is already working, like Pedri, like other groups that are already working in the same space, and we are kind of sharing the same space. And and institutions that want to be partners on this. So very clear call to action, no time to lose, really. We have a month. We have a clear idea what we want to do, but we have to actually write the proposal. We actually need people to submit it. Chris. I think I'm going to give this to you because I've been told that online they cannot hear you. So.
Cheers. Thanks, David. Just a quick question on this bit. As I understand it, the PI role can be, there's a range of types of roles that can be the PI on this, right? It doesn't have to be an academic, or has that not been cleared up?
I think so. I think that there's a range of roles. I'm not entirely sure of the specific details, but it needs to be someone within the organization, and dedicate kind of the 30% of their time, but they're specific. Yeah,
because I thought it's one of the interesting bits of this call, is that it's not just an academic PI that needs to be leading it. Someone, that's a more RSE type role that could be doing this. Because I think if that is the case, then it could be one of you guys that leads it. I would have said, and then I guess then we can work out who the organization that needs to be the responsible organization does that.
We still need the leading organization and that PI person to be within that organization.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But I guess I'm happy to talk about that with you guys.
Perfect. Okay, that's the spirit. Okay, over here. If online there's any questions, please let me know. Simon, fetch that one, please.
Yeah, hello. I don't know if you can hear me. Good, because I can't work out how to raise a hand. So Chris, yes, anybody, it doesn't have to be an academic who leads one of these, but this is an 80% FEC proposal, and that means the flexible funds operate under 80% FEC. So you'll have to persuade your head of department that that this is actually worth putting the other 20% to, because you don't get 100% FEC, and it's not a research proposal. It's a networking proposal. Lots of department heads won't back it as a result. So that's what the main thing I would suggest urgently, that whoever is leading this is that they find an organization who's will back up a 80% FEC Network Plus fund straight away. Don't wait till the last minute.
Thanks, Carlos. I think it's all Emily first, and then Martin.
So I'm delighted to say that we've got some news on DARE Phase 2, which we'll be talking about later on this afternoon. And having had a quick look at the draft bid for this, there's actually some major overlaps in terms of where funding is and things for some of those things. So it's absolutely fantastic that we've identified a need for such a network. DARE Phase 2 doesn't necessarily do all of those, but will do quite a big chunk of work towards these different areas. So it'd be fantastic if we can have a chat about how we can make sure we're not duplicating effort, but we're leveraging resources and making sure that we're all kind of going in the same direction with it. But should this not be funded, there is still significant funding for these activities.
That's amazing to hear. We'll talk later. Martin, and then online to Anthony.
Yeah, just to give a bit of, I guess, lived experience on the like PIs and co-Is thing, and we've had, you know, lots of RSEs in the community take on those sorts of roles, and all of the UKI kind of research councils have sort of made it clear that the criteria are more about permanency of role, and some of them have this lecturer equivalent, but a lot of them don't. So I think that's something that we shouldn't worry too much about. I did have a follow-up question on the 80% FEC for the person who was filling us in on that online. Does the primary organisation, like, is the expectation that we pass on funding at 80% FEC, or that we sort of top it up for organisations that we're funding out of this? Because those are two very different asks, I think, for the host department.
Carol, if you want to go ahead as you've been directly asked, and then I'll go to Anthony.
Can't hear you.
You don't hear me now?
Yeah, so that's what you have to work on. Because if you're passing on costs, if you're passing on, say, if you're paying for somebody to run something, you'll be paying them 100% to run that, but your department will only get, or whoever is the lead, will only get 8% of the costs. So unless you're very clever about how you set this up, you can get yourself into considerable sort of debt with your own department, because obviously what you want to do is pay the actual costs to run the workshop, for somebody to go to something and so on. You can't expect them to be operating at 80%. So the lead organization will be operating at the 80%, and you'll end up giving out 100% in little grants or little activities. And if you're not careful, the budget goes a bit ski-whiff. So that's why I'm suggesting whoever is leading this really thinks very carefully about how to do this. As you can tell, I'm also preparing one of these.
Thanks, Carol. We might be reaching out to you to also run through some things. I think it's Anthony online, and then how are we for time? Yeah, Anthony online. I don't know if you could hear me, but go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Right, cool. Yeah, so I'm a public participation, involvement and engagement person, but I do have a background in biomedical science, so, you know, so that's fine. But I'm just thinking PPIE might help this get over the line, because you know that it's all buzzy, wordy, and timey-wimey and all that. So it just seems a bit missing from this. So I've just sort of sent an email to sort of express an interest in joining the citizens agency group. But I do have some experience in doing this sort of thing with bids and getting money. And in the past, I've got 300k out of the EU, which was 100% FEC actually. So go me. So, but it just seems to be missing, unless I'm missing something myself.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. I was also solving some things online, so I didn't catch everything, but PPI, I think it will be an important part of this, even if we have not properly reflected in there. I think our initial idea was also to collaborate with groups that are much more knowledgeable on PPI than we ourselves are, but clearly not leaving it outside of the bit. Yeah.
Yeah, we've already been in contact with Pedri. We're going to try and arrange a meeting with them at some point when everyone's free.
I'm sort of in Pedri. So that's good. Good first move, but the clock's ticking on this, isn't it? So you got to get that meeting sorted quick. But yeah, good first move. That's fine.
Okay, so thanks everyone. So I think it's time to move on to a couple of keynote talks, followed by a panel on federation. So as you saw in the slide, this is something everyone's really interested in. So our chair for this session will be Kate O'Sullivan.
Good morning, everyone. Kate O'Sullivan. I am head of secure data services at the University of Sheffield. Before we start, I'm going to be really cheeky, and I sent an email out to the TRE community mailing list this morning. I have a vacancy going in one of my teams for a data technical lead role. If you are interested, find me, drop me an email. Happy to chat through the role and sort of what we're looking for. So. Right. So our first keynote talk this morning is from James Fleming, who is Chief Information Officer at the Francis Crick Institute. Most of us know the Crick as being a groundbreaking center for research established by the Medical Research Council, Cancer Research UK, Wellcome, University College London, Imperial College London, and King's College London. James is responsible for, amongst other things, the Crick's IT infrastructure, high performance computing, and 3 public clouds. So James will be speaking to us this morning on reconstructing the human in health research, a vision for data federation.
Thank you very much, Kate. Right, good morning, everyone. Just as we're getting the technology sorted, bear with us 2 seconds. Pleasure to be here in not so sunny Newcastle, but as a native of the Northeast, this is actually my first business trip back in 20 years, so it's delightful to be here. All right, are we good? Excellent.
And can everyone online here see as well?
Everyone online here? We're seeing some nodding, so I think we're good to go. Brilliant. All right, so as the title of my talk implies, I actually want to talk a bit about the why of data federation, because I do think it's important to be really crisp and clear on what we're trying to achieve. Secondly, to sort of try and landscape some of the challenges as we see it. And thirdly, to share some thinking that we've been developing at the Crick, and also I also wear a separate hat as chair of the One London SDE Technical Design Authority. So for those of you familiar with the NHS Data for R&D program overall, it's grouped into 11 different regional sub-programs. I've been asked to chair the Technical Design Authority for the London piece. I wanted to share some thinking that cuts across those two. So without further ado, I think as we all know, we're in the midst of a bit of a digital revolution in how we do both discovery science, translational science, and then apply that into a healthcare environment. But it's also fair to say that we are very siloed in our approach in how we go about looking at each of those problems in isolation, when really we need to think of them as a continuum. How do we flow knowledge creation from pure foundational research and discovery science into translational research, working with a whole variety of different partners that bridge both academia and industry? And how do we ultimately flow that into a healthcare system and then have an appropriate feedback loop that goes back and feeds the next generation of foundational science? Because the thing that we're trying to gun for here is a fundamental revolution in what it means to deliver healthcare and medicine. We're trying to move in terms of care from something that's reactive and illness driven to something that's proactive and health management driven. We're trying to think about diagnosis moving from something that is, let's try one hypothesis at a time. If you've ever had the misfortune, as I have, of having a difficult to diagnose condition, you can be stuck in a loop of test one thing, test another thing for weeks, if not months. How do we move to something that's much more multi-mode and holistic? And how do we move in the space of treatment and realize the potential of precision medicine, moving from generic drugs made by the million to something which is focused around individual patient treatment? And I'd argue all of these things require a complete fundamental rethink in how we manage data. So it's not just about containing it within a trusted research environment and developing insight. It's how you manage and flow that insight all the way down that overall life cycle. So if that's what we're trying to get towards, beg your pardon, what's the challenge that we face? Now, I was trying to find a way to quantify this the other week, and I came across this great piece of research recently published by Joe Zhang, Jess Morley and their colleagues, jointly between the London AI Centre and the Tony Blair Institute, actually. And they've come up with this amazing graph that you can see alongside me here, which basically shows just the staggering layer of complexity that's involved in generating and then extracting and working with just primary and secondary care records. So this is not pathology, it's not genomics, it's not anything more exciting than that. This is simply just primary and secondary care records. We have 6,760 individual sources being extracted by 109 different pieces of infrastructure and flowing into, in total, 396 different TREs. That is 291 million possible combinations of accessing data about only 55 million people. So that's the challenge we've set ourselves in terms of overall federation. And I think the challenge to us all as a community and to our colleagues who look at funding all of these initiatives and back into the NHS as well is, what are we doing about this at a macro level? Because even if we can solve federation at a local technical level, there's still a massive question mark around the policy, the strategy, the funding initiatives that's driving this. And I'm sure if we were to put pathology and genomics and everything else on this diagram, it would be billions of possible combinations. But that's the struggle we're presenting to anyone who's trying to engage in that flow of discovery, translation, and healthcare research. So what might it look like? How do we go from well over nearly 7,500 different pieces of infrastructure to, well, in theory, 7? So we have several orders of magnitude more complexity than I personally believe we need. So how do we get to a model that says within the healthcare system itself, we have a dramatically simplified way of managing that data rather than every single individual GP surgery and trust managing a local fragment of that overall record set? How do we move towards one method of instruction rather than 109 different ones? And then ultimately, how do all of us involved in management of TREs, deployment of TREs and sharing and interacting of that data start to come together on a common framework or platform in which federation starts to become genuinely interoperable? Not professing to say we have all of the answers here today, but we can at least start on something towards a common vision or a dramatic simplification. So I now flip across to some of the One London initiatives, hence why the background of my slide has changed. So I'm implicitly changing hats as I'm talking here. So going back to the why of this, what we see from a CRIC standpoint, we have an interesting perspective, I suppose, in that we are trying to do discovery clinical research whilst being completely outside of the traditional structures that enable that. So we're not a university with a university hospital associated, for example. We sit completely outside of the healthcare system and are trying to interact with it. Our challenges therefore led us to a very different approach in how we designed and developed a TRE infrastructure, basically how you do a pop-up TRE or a virtualized TRE. So deploy a container and then find ways to aggregate and bring data together, because that's fundamentally what we see as the challenge here. Research is moving towards multimodal, multi-scale research. So if you want to understand biological mechanisms, it's not enough to just look at one strata or one data type. You've got to look at multiple different types of data associated with a single individual. You then need to be able to work across different biological scales to understand that fundamental mechanism. So a model that pushes you towards a single mode of data in a single inventory is never, ever going to be the solution to the problem. It's always going to be about aggregation. The second piece we see is very much about the better research. In other words, if you're trying to understand something with all the huge degree of biological variation you see in humans, you have to be working with the best possible and biggest possible data set. You want to understand that signal to noise within what you're looking at as best you can. And that means working with data sets that aren't based around hundreds of individuals, but thousands, tens of thousands, or even millions. And then finally, we want to talk about how we accelerate those kind of health outcomes. How do we go from being this is a great publication to how is this publication actually making an impact to people's lives and accelerating that overall time to science? Again, fundamental challenge we see all day, every day, is that you may have, the typical quantum of how research is done is a PhD or postdoc life cycle, typically 4 years. Normally, at least half of that is actually spent just aggregating data. Certainly that's what we see at the CRIC, is that people will spend their entire PhD or postdoc getting a study up and running for the next person who joins the lab to actually run it. How do we actually get that down from years worth of time to weeks or even days? The opportunity for research productivity within that is absolutely staggering. So what are we trying to do around the actual patient? Well, it's also recognizing that an individual, the data that's captured about them can never, ever be captured by only one body. So yes, the health service has got an incredibly rich data set about all of us, actually, longitudinally over the course of our lives, and different modalities of data are emerging over time. So, genomic sequencing is starting to become the norm with, screening for certain types of pediatric illnesses. Genomics England's been up and running for over a decade now. Equally, there's also NHS affiliated but not NHS driven initiatives like Our Future Health, which are trying to do massive population scale genome mapping. So it's a rich source of data, but it's absolutely not the only source of data, because once you take a patient and consent them into a particular study, you're then generating vastly more data about them. It could be serology, it could be tissue samples, it could be imaging, it could be cryogenic electron microscopy, it could be whole genome sequencing, it could be all kinds of omics. That data needs to be brought together with the NHS view, because that's providing the long-term context about the individual. The data that's generated in lab, as it were, is providing that deep mechanistic understanding of the disease. And then increasingly as well, we also want to bring together contextual information that sort of floats around us. I mean, how many in the audience are wearing some kind of Fitbit or health tracking wearable device or app? That information can be incredibly rich. I know some of our researchers at the CRIC were absolutely blown away by a study, I think it was coming out of Cardiff, that said you can predict the onset of Parkinson's 10 years before any symptoms actually present, simply on the basis of sleep pattern tracking. So that entire space of what we can understand as sort of ongoing longitudinal information about lifestyle is also incredibly rich, and we need to explore. But this all comes back down to the fact that we have got to bring together data across multiple sources, and we've got to do it about unique individuals, which is not necessarily the sort of modus operandi for a lot of TRE infrastructure today. This sort of gives an alternative perspective of how we bring all those pieces together. I kind of envisage it, for those of you who play an instrument, as being a bit like a musical score. Each one of these types of data you can map over time and represents a different instrument. It's only when you bring them all together that you actually understand the piece of music that's being played. So our fundamental challenge here is, how do we cut across all of these different types that represent, different technologies, different administrative boundaries, different information governance layers, and try and present this complete picture not just back to research actually, but back to anyone involved in that sort of patient healthcare management. There's no reason why all this data shouldn't go to your GP if they're the one providing you with primary care. There's no reason why a patient themselves shouldn't understand this kind of data if they're trying to manage not just good health, but equally if they're trying to manage some form of chronic condition. So where's our thinking got to in how we achieve this? Well, for those of you familiar with some of Pete's slides, this is one of his special. I should say we work together at the CRIC, so we're intimately involved in both of those things, and I'm hopefully standing in for him this afternoon in one of those working groups. But what we really want to get to is a model that joins together both worlds with one form of common platform. So how do we bring together authoritative data sets that describe different modalities of understanding about a given patient? How do we, on the other side of the diagram in the R&D world, come up with a common method of linking towards that data that also allows the flexibility to bring together those lab generated data sets and any third-party information? And how do we do so in a model that also enables, information governance to not be something that floats above this, but is directly connected to it, something that's actually technology driven rather than email driven, which we have in a lot of cases. So moving for something that is, as we describe here, tech enabled. Now, critically as well, we also need to bring the citizen and the patient to this as well. I'll talk about that on my final slide as to how all these pieces come together. Another fundamental piece as well that we've been thinking about is we've for a long time had kind of two modes of thinking, both of which have got significant downsides across the TRE community. One is you've got to go to the data and you've got to do all your work within a given TRE environment. Great that it remains within control of that host organization, but not so good that the host has then got to work out how to pay the bill for all of the compute and storage that goes alongside with that. And secondly, the difficulty of actually bringing particularly very large data sets, we're talking petabytes in some cases, to that kind of environment is simply an insurmountable technical barrier. The other mode, of course, is export all of that data, which is very great. It's great for the researcher, maximum flexibility, not so great for those involved in data governance and control because you've just gifted it to the outside world. So a lot of the thinking that we've been doing at the CRIC is very much how we think about a common data fabric that sits behind both of those worlds. How do you get the best of both? Our platform that we've developed internally is based on something called Snowflake, but other data fabrics are available, which does allow for a very elegant way of sharing images of that data that allows to both a host organization to remain in control of it, but a research performing organization to be able to cover their own cost of compute and also bring all of that data together. So paying the bill becomes the problem of the person with the grant rather than the person hosting the data. So bringing all of these pieces together, the proposal we've come up with, we call Lattice, which is how you bring all of these different pieces and problems together into a single research data fabric. And we envisaged it effectively working in 4 zones. So the first zone, data controller zone, is where you bring a particular curated library of data. Now, this could be anything from, if you've got an interesting cohort that you've already done a study on at the sort of order of thousands of people, all the way up to population scale, the NHS Data R&D program, for example. It doesn't really matter, provided that data set is something that you believe has utility to the wider community and you want to place it under a common governance framework. Now, I have deliberately used data library on here as a bit of a nod to the incoming Labour administration's policy manifesto to move towards data libraries, which has been nodding to the direction of travel politically, I believe. But the notion that you can have curated data sets hosted on here that you can then govern shards of for given research collaborations as and when they come to you. So that's the first zone. The second zone is then how we bring together multiple registries. So who do we know who the actors are within this particular environment that are driven by information governance? So that's organizations, it's projects, and it's researchers. And this is basically a way at which we see to bring together multiple different initiatives. Ultimately, everyone's trying to certify one of those things. Some of them already do it very well. Funding bodies go through an enormous amount of scrutiny before they even award you the grant in the first place. Why shouldn't all of that information actually be made available to someone with a data library to say, okay, this person does work for that organization. They have had a project that's been scrutinized by their peers and they are good for the funding that they claim they are. Why do they have to start all over again? So the concept of registries is built into this as well. The third zone is then how you create a trusted research environment around a project collaboration, recognizing that within institutions and actually within healthcare ethics, you govern individual projects, you don't govern data sets. So someone coming along saying, I want to perform, a longitudinal lung cancer study with 1,000 patients. Here is my protocol. That is quite distinct in terms of its governance from here is a population data set of 8 million people. So in other words, we need to be able to manage both particular dimensions, and the ability to deploy a project-centered TRE, that is the environment in which the actual data aggregation can take place. The collaboration then makes requests of multiple of those data libraries within one IG framework that says, I've got 1,000 people, please can I have, if you've got their genome sequences, can I have them please? If you've got their primary and secondary care records, can I have those as well? And if pathology information is available on file, can I also have those pieces? That can be brought to the project TRE and all the additional information that's generated sort of offline within a lab, or if you're issuing with them with wearables or whatever it happens to be, that's where that piece can be brought together. And you can have two dimensions of governance within this. You can govern the data set distinctly from the actual project collaboration itself. And that's where the bulk of the work is done. It's designed to be temporary, it's designed to be dynamic, and it's designed to be closed down at the end of the project. So all of those shares, the blue arrows, are shut down at the end, and no data persists within that beyond that point. The final piece of the puzzle, which we'll be talking about a little bit more this afternoon, I think, in the citizen agency working group, is then how we also bring in citizen/patient within this, recognizing that models of consent today are pretty blunt instruments. If you're working with Section 251 consent, it's either you've opted in or you're opted out. You as an individual have no more control over that. What if I want to opt in for certain studies? What if I want to opt in with certain organizations working with my data, but not others? I don't have that level of control today as a member of the public. Equally, the opposite, the other side of the fence as well is that if you've done an individual project consent, you've agreed to be part of study A. Study A might generate incredibly useful information that could form part of a data library on the left-hand side. But the ethics and the consent that you gave was only for study A. When study B comes along that says, I might like to make reuse of your data, there is no consistent way of reconsenting you or involving you back in that new study research. So the concept here is, how do we create a data account that centers the patient within it, that helps the patient or the citizen actually understand who's got what of their data, what they have consented to, and provides a singular mechanism for any new researcher to involve the patient within that. So that the question of, can your data actually be accessed by project collaboration 1 from data library ABC, becomes a patient question as much as it becomes an overall information governance question. And the role of IG changes from being data access boards trying to work out whether or not some fairly blunt instruments in terms of legal documentation and consent can be bent into a particular context, which in turn leads to a considerable degree of conservatism, understandably. You don't want to be on the back of making the wrong decision, to something where they can recommend, yes, this is a quality piece of research. Yes, these people are going to do what they say they do. And yes, they've got track record. We recommend that you consider being involved in it, but ultimately it's a patient choice at the end of the day. And then all of that is then have a consistent workflow across the top of this overall platform to bring all of these pieces together and to make sure that it is governed from a direct sort of tech-enabled model, infrastructure as code style model, I should say, rather than being something which is administratively driven with reams and reams of emails and different pieces of documentation. So we submitted this as a request into the, can't remember which funding call it was. I guess we'll find out this month whether or not we were successful. But from our perspective, this is something we need to build anyway for our own usage. We've already built the trellis aspect of it, the research performing organization zone internally within the CRIC. We have, I suppose, an alpha version of the patient consent registry built. And we're now starting to work on our own version of data library because we have lots of data we'd like to share with the community. We need the mechanism to do it. We're also talking to a lot of organizations in the sort of London area. not just the SNSDE program, but also there's lots of very rich data sets held by various biological research centres affiliated with the universities in London. I want to see if we can get them on board, and we'd be delighted to talk to anyone in the broader community as well. We've as part of our lattice bid, we were talking to Yorkson Humber, born and bred in Bradford, and a whole variety of other organisations about forming the nucleus of this. But if you'd like to get on board and you see merit in it, then we'd love to talk to you as well. So on that note, thank you very much. I think we're doing Q&A after the second talk. Yeah, we are indeed. So I'll cede the floor. Thank you.
So just a quick note for anyone. Okay, just a quick note for anyone in the room. We've opened questions on Slido. The links I gave you earlier. I can bring up briefly. Well, actually, no. Go to the Hack Indeed. There's a link to Slido. If you've got any questions about the previous talk or the upcoming talk, ask them in Slido, and so we'll go through them after.
So our second speaker today is Darren Bell, who's director of the UK Data Service. The UK Data Service provides trusted access and training to the UK's largest collection of economic, population, and social research data for teaching and learning and public benefit. Darren leads the technical services team and is currently overseeing the transformation of the repository from a traditional social sciences file-based infrastructure into a cross-domain data platform based on linked open data in the cloud, as well as building deeper integration with international research infrastructures through key alliances. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Is this on? Is this on? No?
There you go.
Yeah, there we go. All right, thank you. Right, I know some of you, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm Darren Bell. I should correct you, I'm not actually director of UK Data Service. Our new director who started 2 weeks ago will probably be quite upset about that. I was doing that job for about 18 months, but I'm currently director of technical services. So I have responsibility for our secure lab infrastructure as well as development functions and cloud infrastructure more generally. For those of you who don't know UK Data Service, the main partner is UK Data Archive, and we hold around 9,000 social science data sets, some census aggregate data, census microdata. Of that 9,000, roughly 300 data sets are in what we call Secure Lab, but which is essentially just a TRE. I guess we're the kind of OG TRE. We've been doing this for about 12 or 13 years. We run, I think, what would be classed as a fairly traditional environment at the moment based on a Citrix cloud-based control plane and on-prem Citrix Zen desktop. Run about 64 simultaneous TREs at the moment, so it's not a very small footprint. So Rob Baxter asked me to do 20 minutes on federation, so it's fairly open-ended, and I had to think yesterday about how best to approach this. And so my perspective on this is that we obviously have an immense amount of work to do. I think we all know that. But in terms of why we actually want to do federation, everyone's gathered here, and this is a community, or is it an association or a coalition? What's the difference between that kind of agglomeration of interested parties and an actual federation? Well, we need to think about federations now because, stating the rather obvious, we face lots of challenges of scale now, just in terms of the sheer amount of data available. Now, it's not just the volume of data that's the problem, it's that much of this is locked up in too many repositories, small repositories at the moment, and we cannot maximally leverage the value in that data. Now, when we talk about federation, what we're really talking about is an agreement between a number of parties. But what the difference with the federation is, it also implies some agreed shared rules that are actually enforced. It actually implies a federal government, if you think about this from a political angle. Now, federal government is probably sounds a little bit like hyperbole, I guess, but I think I'm glad that James raised some of the points and arrived at some of the conclusions that I've come to from a different perspective, is that there are just too many small players out there at the moment. And this is really, really hurting at a national level and actually at a European level. If you look at the European Open Science Cloud, the ability to implement a genuinely interoperable large-scale research infrastructure across borders and particularly across domains. Now, federation, this is a little trope I come up with almost every presentation, that federation implies interoperability, which also implies standards. Now, I'm going to do the standards joke because someone always does it. The great thing about standards is there are so many of them to choose from. Now, that's perfectly true, but in a way, that joke undermines its own argument because there are standards there, and it's all you have to do is actually choose a standard and adhere to it, which is currently not really happening at the moment. Okay, so in terms of why we want to federate, the important thing is what does it do for our users, consumers, customers, depending on your personal preference. Ultimately, we're trying to achieve better services for users here. I think from the TRE perspective and managing sensitive data, we know that the biggest pain point for users is that it takes too long often to get hold of the data. So in order to improve that, having agreed standards and a federated infrastructure would definitely help that. But I'll come on shortly to some of the reasons why we might want to federate, simply about improving application access times. So when we talk about federation, we're talking about federating organizations. Now, in a traditional classical model, you would think, well, we have, currently hundreds of organizations that provide TRE services. We might want to think about federating them, getting to use common standards. So within the ESRC stable, for instance, I would agree as UKDS to be using the same standards as HDR UK and ADR UK SAIL data bank, because that's currently not happening. But the thing is, like James was saying earlier, he used the word catastrophe, and I'm not sure that is hyperbole, actually. There are so many thousands of players out there at the moment. It's almost impossible by a process of consensus to get them all to do the same thing in a deterministic and predictable and consistent way. So there is going to have to be some consolidation. In fact, consolidation is not just inevitable, it's certainly desirable. Now, as well as having a kind of top-down approach to making that federated infrastructure happen, we need incentives as well, and we need disincentives for not standardizing as well, and I'll come on to that shortly. Okay, so all of this really, stating the obvious, is about serving the researchers and providing service for the researchers, because that's what we do. Now, whether it's in the European Open Science Cloud or in a lot of infrastructure documents, I don't see the researcher mentioned often enough. Now, that's not a deliberate oversight. It's just because we're developers, technicians especially, we tend to get very excited about new ways of doing things, serverless architectures, Dockerization, but we should never lose sight of what the researcher wants to get out of it. Now, to my mind, we're not coming up with enough killer use cases which really clearly articulate what's in this for the researcher. Now, the F word has been floating around for quite a few years. 18 months ago, I went up to Birmingham, and at JISC Network Shop, everyone was talking about federation journeys. At no point did anyone mention at any time how this would actually benefit the research. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that. So the vision, what I try and do as a thought experiment is think, if I'm a researcher in 10 years' time, what would I want to be able to do that I cannot do now? Now, this isn't necessarily even science fiction, but imagine as a researcher, I could rock up to a console that either might be a virtual console or a desktop. It could even be a VR headset. It kind of doesn't matter what the client device is. But the analogy I often use is when you book an airline ticket. Now, when you go onto skyscanner.net or something like that, you say, I want to go from A to B, and then a whole back-end messaging infrastructure that relies on standard protocols, APIs, goes and searches hundreds of providers and airlines, comes back with a selection of different prices, orders the prices, give you the options. Now, if you could do that in a research infrastructure, so you could say all of the data that's out there, let's why not? Let's say in the world, all the data that's out there in the world with clear delineation of what access conditions were there, how much time, how much effort it would take you to get hold of that data, clear identification of linkages for that data that would help your research question. Almost just a self-service kind of warehousing model that you could get any data you wanted for any research question. Now, clearly, you can't immediately download that stuff, but you might want to say, I can get an automated workflow running that gets the approvals, the ethical approvals, and it fires up, let's say, a container on some platform, and away I go. Now, all of that plumbing is technically possible. What's currently missing is the upstream metadata that enables all of that to happen. Now, clearly the problem's more complicated than that, but this is a topic I come back to again and again. At the moment, we focus on the endpoints, and rightly so, but the upstream curation pipelines and the data lifecycle is really what's killing us at the moment. So what we've got so far, we have a number of really good frameworks. 5 Safes is a kind of high-level way of thinking about these problems. SATRA is a really nice piece of work. I'm really glad to see implementation level diagrams, having worked with FAIR a few years, which is all about principles. In the kind of regulatory accreditation space, we have DEA. So we do have some things there. We've got some initial agreements, as you've seen earlier, about roles and professionalizing this. But at the moment, we don't and can't agree on standard representations of data across domains. We can't agree on standards for metadata within a single research council, never mind UKRI, never mind the European Open Science Cloud. So the thing is, data ought to be able to be standardized, but I mean, for ourselves, we use SPSS and Stata, we use CSV, we use Excel. I don't know what HDR UK are doing, but we're certainly not talking to them about having common data formats. And those are the conversations that need to happen. And ultimately, once those conversations have happened, those agreements have been reached, they need to be enforced and monitored. So access and risk. Okay, this is one of the things that really, really hurts our thinking and our mental model about how we disseminate data and how we actually even think about sensitive data. Access classifications are largely a reflection of assumed risk. And I say assumed risk because it's largely a human-driven process at the moment. It's not entirely human-driven, but to a large extent, apart from some tooling like Sacro, SDC Micro that people use, these decisions are taken by humans and not often auditable decisions either. So each local repository will have its own way of classifying data. Now, Rob's working on a glossary at the moment, which I hope will elicit some clear definitions about what do we mean by sensitive data, which is not the same as confidential data. So that's one thing. But at the UK Data Service, we talk about controlled data, safeguarded data, open data. OpenAir will talk about a completely different set of tiers of classifications. If we can't even agree on 3 or 4 standard top-level classifications for data, we still have a lot of work to do. So I'm kind of going to address the elephant in the room, because over the last couple of years, there's been some consternation, certainly the UK Data Service, about it's not a policy, it's more of a vibe that, this is all really, really hard. This is difficult stuff, doing granular variable level privacy engineering is really hard. Why don't we just chuck everything in a TRE and be done with it? Now, my views don't necessarily represent those of the UK Data Service, because I think that's actually what we should do. But do I think it's actually going to happen in the next 5 years? No. Could it happen in the next 10 years? Possibly. Could it happen in the next 15 to 20? Absolutely. And when I say put all data and everything into a TRE, I mean literally everything. I mean, all research is conducted through a remote session, whether that's a desktop or an online analytics environment like Jupyter Lab. That will ultimately solve most of the problems, not all of them, because you still have to secure the client device. As some of you will know, we go through all sorts of hoops to make researchers, Alex, you will know this, to take photographs of their slightly absurd things like taking photographs of their office to make sure they can't be overseen, all of that kind of nonsense. But that is the long-term solution. In the next decade, we don't really have that option for a whole variety of reasons. Cost, the ability of hundreds of players to agree to do this in a consistent way. But even having done that, even if you ran literally everything through TRE as a glorious thought experiment, you would still have to model the data. You would still need to know what data sets are appropriately linkable. You would still have to have good algorithms and automated work tool chains for doing output checking. So, you know, it's not a solution to everything. Okay, so as I said earlier, federation implies interoperability. Interoperability, we tend to think about interoperability often as machine readability. If I put my data or my metadata in some JSON LD, I'm done, and I can tick that box. But in fact, it's quite sophisticated and involved in terms of the different ways you need to think about interoperability. You have semantics, structural interoperability, alluding to what I said earlier about not having a common data format. You know, how can we come up with a standard that, so it doesn't matter whether you're using key value data, multidimensional data, two-dimensional tabular data, and make that truly interoperable across domains. That's simply not possible at the moment. And also functional interoperability. Most TREs currently do roughly the same things in terms of taking an application to a researcher. You know, the form captures are the same. What's the societal benefit of this research? What's the research question? Ethical approval, we bounced off to data owners. Those kinds of workflows should be standardized and should be modeled in machine actionable metadata. And where a lot of the effort is going at the moment is on the technical interoperability, and that's critically important, but to my mind, it is to the detriment of some of these other things, and more attention needs to be paid, particularly to structural and functional interoperability. So metadata, and particularly upstream metadata, which emerges from good curation practice. And by good curation practice, I mean machine learning. I don't mean any more half a dozen administrators sitting in a room eyeballing data. There's a lot of hype about AI, but one of the best use cases I can think of in repositories at the moment is machine learning for metadata enrichment. So when we talk about metadata, everyone goes, catalog metadata, discoverability, that's the easy bit. Now, I think I will scream if I have to review another application that says we're going to use AI to basically scrape the web pages and give you an AI-driven search. It's kind of, there's just no more conversation there. It's not hard to discover data, especially if you go onto Google, who tend to do a better job than most repositories at the moment. The hard bits of metadata are provenance, audit trails, where does your data come from, custody transfer, who owns it, how did you transform the data, metadata support privacy engineering, which needs to be done at a granular variable level. We know there's these things called key variables that ONS go on and on about, you know, about 15 to 20 key variables. How do I identify those? Sometimes it'll be in a README text file that says this is a key variable. This is crazy in 2024. That should be at the source at the data. Rights management workflows, access workflows, none of that is currently modeled in metadata. Semantics, ontologies and vocabularies, nothing new under the sun there. Are people actually using ontologies as much as they should? Nowhere near it. So challenges of standardization. We have a UK TRE community here, but we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that the web is global. HTTP is a global protocol. If we're going to federate within the UK, we should make those interfaces work in Europe and more widely. So this, I'm not here to sell something called CDIF, okay, but to give an example about how we might approach this, I've been working with CoData for the last 2 or 3 years on something called the cross-domain interoperability framework. And what we're trying to do here is, rather than going back to the standards joke, there are so many to choose from, saying, look, there are some mature standards out there. Okay, so why don't we agree to settle on some common use case standards? So for cataloging, DCAT or schema.org, for access workflows, open digital rights language, or semantics and semantic mappings, we might want to use SISM, which is simple standard for ontology mappings. Now, all of those can be recommended within a framework, and there is something called CDIF at the moment. You don't need to particularly know or care about that, because I'm not here to pitch CDIF, but this is an example of an approach that we might take. So the cross-domain catastrophe, to use James's word at the moment, is that when we try to interoperate data, we're actually doing point-to-point transforms between hundreds of different standards. So rather than trying to do mappings for each standard, domain-specific standard, whether that be in ADR UK to UKDS or UKDS to ONS or Cell Data Bank, a better approach would be to say, look, we want to retain some level of domain specialist data management, but as a federation, you can all map to a smaller number of agreed standards. Now, in the CDIF model, again, I'm not here to pitch this, this is just an example, you would say, you would have a framework which says, for your catalogue data, you use DCAT. Now, it's just an example, it doesn't have to be DCAT, although it probably would be. Use DCAT and or schema.org. Now, at the moment, there's a consensus in this room, and there's a lot of motivated and willing people, but no one's forcing you to do anything at the moment. I think James was referring to the policy and strategy imperatives. Now, UKRI, as I understood it 5 or 6 years ago, was going to be a vehicle for centralisation, de-siloisation of a lot of these things, and for many reasons that I don't want to go to, and I probably don't understand either, that simply hasn't happened. So we have each individual research council largely doing its own thing at the moment. Now, in the longer term, what we're going to need to do is really, what we need to do is standardise, but as well as agreeing to standardise on those things, we're going to have to get someone to be responsible for overseeing and enforcing it. If you're not going to use DCAT, you can't come to the party. That needs to be the long-term vision, because that's how Google Data Commons works. If you don't use schema.org, that's your decision, but you're not part of the club. And I'm afraid if we're going to make serious progress over the next 10 years, that's what needs to happen. So, you know, just some brief ideas as to what some of those standards might look like. You might be looking at DCAT schema.org for catalogue metadata. You might be looking, this is an open area that needs some work, but you might be looking at SDMX, CSV on the web, Parquet, NetCDF. I don't think well, probably not, but just some examples of the kind of things that are out there. Domain-specific ontologies need to be retained, but we need to map those between domains as well. And there are formal mechanisms to do that. Sensitive data, marking that at a granular variable level, data privacy vocabulary, which is a very mature, sophisticated standard now with lots of extensions for GDPR personal data. Now, I can raise this here, but there is no vehicle or mechanism at a higher policy level to say, you know what, we're going to set up a metadata standards committee here, which is not only going to recommend, but it's going to say you've got 10 years to migrate to this, at which point, if you're not using it, that's going to seriously jeopardize your chances of getting funding in the future. So for rights management, we might be looking at open digital rights language, data use ontology, and disclosure risk. There's not much there at the moment in terms of quantifiable risk profiles. This is a really interesting area for research, because what would be great if you could get a data set and say, rather than it just saying, oh, this data set's sensitive, it's controlled, actually having some machine readable and actionable metadata that describes why it's sensitive. What are the key variables? What are the frequency counts? What's the L diversity, K anonymity, SUDA2 scores? Now, all of that could be done, but it's not being done at the moment. So, in summary, what we need really is a clearer vision of what's in this for the researcher, because that's who it's for at the end of the day. An end to small vertically integrated repositories, of which I am an employee. Okay, now, I think James was saying the problem of thousands, billions of combinations and way is absolutely true. Over the last 30 years, IT has matured. Now, and then when I started in the 90s, you could wander around the building and you knew most things about most things. Now, as part of natural maturity of that space, it's become really quite hyper specialized in a lot of areas. We have two guys looking after our TRE, as well as having to be Citrix sysops. They need about data modeling, our package management, Jupyter Lab, serverless functions, all sorts of things. That cannot be done anymore by two people, by smaller repositories. That means those functions need to be abstracted away and given to more specialized and bigger organizations. So the quality of upstream metadata, I originally wrote poor, but I've learned to be more diplomatic. It's suboptimal at the moment, and it really needs to be improved if we're going to be serious about interoperability and federation. We need to focus more effort on looking at the access and rights problem, the machine actionable dimension of that anyway, because far too much time is wasted on yet another catalogue of catalogues and the discovery problem. We also need a serious commitment to an advocacy for a small number of preferred standards by ideally UKRI, and a body that has some teeth to say, if you're not doing this, it's gonna, you know, there are disincentives to not doing that. So adoption of standards, yeah, I just don't believe it will arrive by consensus and collaboration. It should do, but humans will always take the path of least resistance, as we always know. So there needs to be a small element of benign dictatorship here somewhere along the line in terms of strategy and policy. So that means clear incentives and also disincentives to not adopting them. So I think with the right changes at a high policy and strategic level, this is entirely doable. As Rob has said to me a few times now, it's entirely true. This is no longer a technical problem. It's a data modeling problem, a strategy problem, and a policy problem. So, so those are my thoughts on federation. Thank you.
I'm just wondering, actually, James, mind, and Darren also, if you wouldn't mind just sitting down here. We now move into the Q&A panel, and we are also going to be joined by two additional panelists. So the first, and if I can invite you to come down, please, is Peter McCallum, who is Elixir CTO, and Emily Jefferson from HDR UK, amongst other things. So I have the kind of unenviable task of trying to ask you all and trying to kind of amalgamate all of the excellent questions that have come online. So I think I'd like to start off by kind of, I noticed that the elephant in the room slide, but actually I think one of the first elephants in the room is what we mean by federation. And so I'm wondering if the panelists could actually kind of explain what you mean by federation, or what your perception of federation is, and whether you think that in and of itself is so fragmented that actually that is a barrier for us to actually federating.
Yeah. All right. So to me, federation, at the risk of labouring the point, federation is membership that comes with both benefits and obligations. So what we have in this room at the moment is a community that's agreeing to collaborate on ways forward. This isn't the same as a federation, which is saying I agree to abide by certain obligations to make this happen. Now, a federation combines that element of self-rule, but also a commitment to shared rules as well.
I agree completely with Darren, which I suppose is a good thing. I'd add to that as well. It's almost like a game theory problem to say that if we're going to access mutual benefit, then there has to be mutual constraint. And it's about setting the right level, which says an individual organization can do its own thing up to a point. But beyond that point, where you actually want to interwork with others and get benefit beyond that point, you have to accept a series of constraints. And I must admit, I really like Darren's way of sort of breaking it down to each of those areas. You know, the technology part is just one part of it. The human factor is absolutely critical within that, the standards factor, and also actually I'd go a bit further and say that the data source strategy is critical. I mean, a particular lens on the sort of biomedical and healthcare data space, but if you consider that each one of those 6,760 different sources I mentioned is a slightly different implementation, even if you manage to code a disease consistently across them, there's no way of saying that the data has actually been entered consistently. There's quality control there as well. So I also think it's not just about saying this bit is where we all agree to work together. There also has to be some standards and obligation pushed back on that data generation as well. But to your second part of your question of, is the definition of federation a barrier? I think it is, because I'm going back to sort of glossary of terms piece. I don't think we've ever really crystallized what that means in a way that everyone can jump around. It tends to be used very loosely and in any number of things as a global panacea rather than something precise that we could ally to.
So I work for a European organization. Now, of course, Europe is not a federation, but in many ways it behaves as if it is, of course. And our central research funding, the European Open Science Cloud, are kind of based on that model, and they will act eventually as a kind of gatekeeper mechanism, and they will set standards if they work. Even within Europe, there are multiple standards, and in the space of TREs, we have European Health Data Space, the European Open Science Cloud, not quite converging yet, but there is a motivation towards that. There are alternatives to genuine federation, though, because, of course, we have countries that are not part of Europe, but that are seeking to participate and are part of the dialogue on choosing those standards. But if there is a powerful standard-setting body at the heart, it does kind of drive people together. You can do things through treaties rather than federations. You don't need to accept governance. But forming a large treaty organization with many parties is almost as much job. I think either you will end up with a de facto standard being pushed by the largest player, or you're going to have to come together and reach some sort of agreement. I do agree that too many standards will make it impossible.
I'm going to take a slightly different view on it. Well, all of those are the same. All of those I very much agree with, but I'm really excited about federation because I think it means that actually our community has reached a certain level of maturity. So as previously we're all set up independently as independent groups, we're now starting to talk about, hang on a second here, if we work together, we can do projects that cross different TREs. We can work together. But if we do that, well, we'll need to have a rule book for how we go about doing that. And I think because there's many different ways in which you can technically run a federated project or technically set up metadata federation, when we say federation, people sometimes have a particular way of doing that in their heads. So we do have to start to get a language of federation to look at different models and say, right, we're doing federation and we're supporting this model, and this model. But we shouldn't get too scared about federation because it just means we're maturing and we've still got to work all of these things out. So we're at quite a nice turning point, I suppose, in order to do that.
So again, kind of trying to summarize some of the questions that have come in. One, kind of another theme is around the tension between individual data controllers and us as organizations trying to facilitate this. So I guess the kind of the question from the audience is how do you reconcile the requirements of individual data controllers in order to properly federate?
You just say pretty please. Give a sensible answer.
Are you sure you don't want to pull off?
No, one helpful thing in this space, and we get a confusion with it as well as the number of TREs grow, is to distinguish the infrastructure and the TRE provider from the data controller. We're used to them being the same person, and that doesn't scale very well. And eventually, I think most of our TREs will be hosted in someone else's infrastructure, maybe even the cybersecurity managed by someone else, but data control can be kept much finer grained than that, I think.
Beyond asking nicely. So I think particularly where, again, come back to the biomedical space, this is where the notion of actually introducing individual agency becomes very important. And I think the future role of a data controller has got to move from being, someone who is acting with a sense of sole responsibility against one agreement at a point in time, to someone who is facilitating a conversation back with the true owner of that data, i.e. the individual, because otherwise you just end up with too many conflicting policies to try and implement over what are largely, or should be largely, interoperable data sets. So, I mean, that's why we very much wanted to include sort of the citizen agency consent model from day one, as a way of moving beyond the models of data control we have today to something which is, I think, more fit for purpose in the future. But if we still have to accept that we have individual control regimes at the moment, the question becomes, how many of them could be consolidated, firstly? Do we actually, in some cases, need to be advocating for changes in primary legislation to make that happen? Again, thinking back to healthcare data, it is an act of legislation to say who controls what, and it's done at an incredibly low level within that kind of structure I showed up there. But then there's also what's the generation beyond that as well, and how do we give citizen control and autonomy back within that overall framework?
Yeah, I think data owners quite naturally and rightly err on the side of caution. We have things in our TRE that don't really need to be there, but the data owner is saying, just to be on the safe side, we'll put those into the TRE. I think what needs to happen, and I alluded to this earlier, is about transparency of disclosure risk in our particular use case. At the moment, we can't clearly demonstrate to the data controller how risky their data is. It's a kind of spectrum of risk. How much appetite do you have for risk? A kind of analog assessment of the disclosure risk. Once we're able to actually provide more transparent and granular empirical determinations of what the actual risk is there, you would hope there'd be a virtuous circle where you can reassure the data owner, say, actually, this isn't actually that risky. It doesn't necessarily need to go into a TRE. Those conversations are difficult to catalyze until we have that kind of empirical assessments of risk in place.
So we'll give it a little bit more of a sensible answer. Just to say, so I don't personally think that asking every single person to look at which projects they opt in or opt out of will mean that we can have an unbiased way of doing UK-wide population statistics, particularly if we can say that the data is, in all intents and purposes, anonymous and is held within a TRE, so that there aren't lots and lots of copies all out there. For me, that balances off the level of risk versus the level of public benefit. Different people have different takes on this, but I think it is about bringing in different data controllers and talking them through what those controls are and where you can have that proportionate risk scale. And this is really changing over time, with more and more people getting more of an understanding. So 5 years ago, these ideas were all new to people. They really didn't get the idea of a TRE, but now, TRE or SD is very much within the sort of wider understanding there. So I do think we're moving forward with it, but I think we've still got quite a way to go around that proportionate risk appetite.
Thank you. I think so. Someone online has asked the question: do research councils actually have a role to play here in kind of enabling federation, and what would that look like for all of you within this space?
So I sit outside your space, so this is very interesting. The commission are not shy about saying, you people should all standardize. We're paying you to standardize. Your research councils are run differently. They're at arm's length and they're run by the scientists. So if the research councils aren't saying that, it must be that their advisors aren't saying that. So somebody somewhere is not whispering in the council's ear, you should be standardizing at this stage. And I think that's very interesting. And today I'm pleased to say it's not my problem.
So I think the question is, do they have a role? Yes, absolutely. Is it a role they're necessarily comfortable with at the moment? No. I mean, my background before I moved to Crick 6 years ago was actually in telecoms. And I reflect there that, you know, that the move from lots and lots of different networking standards back in the sort of 90s to the rise of TCP/IP, the internet protocol, the thing that was the one ring to rule them all. I mean, that sort of emerged as a community-driven thing. There was no one body that stood up and said, we must have a standard and we're going to define it. But I think so UKRI might not be the body that is sitting there writing the standard. It might well be emerging from this community, but UKRI has absolutely got to recognize the value of that and has probably got to put the resources into it and then create the policies to endorse that longer term. I think the worst possible mechanism we could end up with is yet another rider attached to a grant saying, thou shalt conform to federation. And then there's nothing beyond that point. And then every individual researcher is now wondering, how on earth do I manage to comply with this? So it's got to be something which is, I suppose, centrally coordinated, driven. The value is recognized and it's funded accordingly. Does it necessarily need to be a group of people employed by UKRI who make that happen? No, but I think that value's got to be recognized and that endorsement's got to be there as well.
Yeah, I'll come on no surprise that I think research councils do have an absolute role here. Ultimately, they hold the purse strings, you know, they hold the money. And if there's only one incentive or disincentive, it's going to be the money. Now, research councils, you know, we've already had discussions with the SRC about them taking a more proactive role in enforcing standards within the SRC. There have been a couple of kind of nascent conversations, haven't really gone anywhere yet. I think James is right. They're probably a little bit uncomfortable being in that particular zone. But what I would like to see at a UKRI level is some kind of standards commission that had teeth. And, you know, ultimately, as I was saying earlier, if you don't conform, in the end, you know, you will have disincentives for not conforming. I still firmly believe that none of this will happen by consensus. I get the TCP/IP analogy, but I think the way that the web has emerged is because it's essentially a killer app. It was such a compelling, a bit like smartphones, you know, it's such a compelling use case for the consumer that everyone naturally gravitates towards it really quickly. I don't know what our killer app is going to be to make that kind of amalgamation around a common standard happen. So the other alternative is that there's a little bit of stick as well as some carrot.
So I'm delighted to say that the talk later on this afternoon will be about, so just pitching it all there in case anybody wants to go off to the pub beforehand, but we've got a talk on DARE Phase 2. DARE is funded by UKRI Cross Council, and the board have agreed to some significant funding around developing standards within this space. And that will be community driven, and that will be all of you please getting involved with the development of how we do want to work together. So that's really good news from my side. The next thing though is, how do we encourage people to adopt those standards and want to use them? And we've got to find ways in that regard.
So again, another question from online is, if we put everything into one TRE, or even just a very small number, how do we avoid risks of single points of failure?
We don't put everything into one TRE.
That's just cloud replication and redundancy, isn't it? I think that's a solved problem. It's an infrastructure issue.
But how do we, I guess the question is, like, how do we avoid that?
Well, I mean, when you build any platform now, you wouldn't put it in one data center, you'd replicate it amongst multiple data centers. Yeah, I'm not sure I understand. Yeah.
The notion of federation, and
Mhm.
especially if we are amalgamating data, but again, let's say we're not doing a kind of partitioned federated query, but we're actually compiling data. How do we, I mean, aside from the technical component, how do we make sure that there isn't a single point of failure in other ways?
So for me, if we were to put everything into one TRE, there would be some major disadvantages of doing that in terms of the innovation to work within that space, how we create new capabilities within that, how we ensure that there isn't sort of a massive backlog of projects needing to go into that environment. There's all sorts of complexities around that, but I don't think that that's ever going to be the real problem, because I think the challenge of getting all of the different data custodians to agree to put all of the data into one massive data warehouse is so far away from where we're going to get to that it's more of a hypothetical question. I think it's more around how do we, if we are in a federated way where there are lots of pockets of different data, how do we federate in such a way that streamlines that process so that it doesn't take a huge amount of time to run projects where you might need data from different places?
Yeah, okay. So I think the idea of one single TRE is not a good one, and that's simply because of domain specialisms. Now, where we are at the moment, that within each domain, there may be multiple TREs. I think there's a perfectly good argument to say we can identify domain constellations in the sense that some domains are more equal than others. I mean, social sciences and health data has clearly got a lot more in common than social sciences and particle accelerator data. So I could see a small number of TREs that would be based around these domain constellations. But again, they wouldn't be vertically integrated. So you might abstract the storage functions away. You might abstract away the training and support functions, the preservation functions, the access brokerage functions, so it's a different way of thinking about it in terms of, as I said earlier, rather than having a federated model of organizations, having a federated model of services and functions.
I would say at the moment in the UK, with your experience of federation, you do stand in a useful position as a model worldwide. And we know this in Europe because the Europeans are looking at the UK model. And eventually, even if you could have one domain-specific TRE, you're going to have one per nation. Whether for the UK that means 1 or 4 is already an interesting question. But you're certainly never going to be using the same TRE as Germany or Russia. So we can see that there will inevitably be domain-specific and national sovereign TREs, as well as other specialized ones maybe put together for transnational domain activities. So there will always be federation, and it's quite useful that we stand at a point where in the UK, we understand that quite well and have a bit of a leading role in it.
I do think it's an important exercise actually to identify what those domains are and look how we start building a roadmap towards them consciously as well, though, because I think one thing we've got to be very conscious of is the quantum of funding available is always going to be limited, and we are not doing ourselves any favors by distributing that many, many times over, solving the same basic problem. So, there's never going to be one ring to rule them all. There might be one architecture to rule them all. That needs sort of clarity on what each subdivision is looking at. Do we have one area that looks at medical imaging, for example, one area that looks at genomics, one area that looks at structured data, one that looks at geospatial? But there needs to be one or a very finite number of those resources that are sort of top-down funded and invested in, I think. As distinct from the problem of how do you then create innovation around that, that's more how do you take a portfolio style approach and say 80 goes on the core infrastructure, 20 goes on the innovation, for example. So you can blend those kind of two dynamics, but there's equally got to be some point where it does come together and there is a finite number of things we invest in centrally. So it'll never be one thing, but it might be one roadmap that we're all working to. I think is what we need to get to.
I think I have time to ask one more question again. So there are quite a number of questions, particularly around citizen agency, and you have touched on the different across in some of the answers around the different legal basis for processing data for research. So I wonder if you can talk about the role of patients and the public in ideas of federation and what that actually means in practice, particularly when this is such a specialized kind of field.
So I would by no means claim to be an expert in this, but I'll just reflect on some of the conversations we had whilst doing the PPIE work for Trellis, which was funded by DARE Phase 1. And I think what came through very strongly was the notion that at the moment it's kind of all or nothing. So the Section 251 consent at a macro level basically says, unless you tell us otherwise, your data can be used in medical research. Great. Do any of us have visibility of what a register of those research projects is? No. Do any of us have any granularity of control around that? Also no. For sort of projects or organizations which have taken a subset of population data, so UK Biobank or Our Future Health, for example, generally speaking, when you sign up to one of those projects, you're signing to an incredibly broad set of consent. It basically says, on your head be it, we can use your data any way we deem fit from this point onwards. So again, once you've opted in, and you probably do so with an implicit set of your own constraints, I believe I am giving my data in these particular contexts. It's going to be used by academic research, it's going to be used in drug discovery, for example. You don't know what it's actually been used for from that point onwards. And there's a varying degree of transparency, and you've got to go and actively seek it out past that point. So I think that the role of the patients and public isn't to go back to sort of square one questions, which I do see a lot of these research projects are tending to do, which is say, are you happy for your data to be used in research? Yes, is the overwhelming response from the public, but we need to move beyond that point of, well, yes, but what are the buts and what are the constraints around that? And how do we incorporate that as a first order design principle in any architecture we're building to say, there will be buts, how do we accommodate them? Because I do feel that we are one, newspaper headline away from losing public trust in this whole space. At the moment, there's a general consensus that there's goodwill, that research is a good thing. It does lead to cures. And I think a lot of that is coming off the back of COVID as well. That was a massive win for global healthcare generally. But it only takes one or two counter stories to run against that for that trust to erode almost overnight. So the question has got to become, there has to be a middle ground. We can't just rely on these really blunt instrument consent models to try and force as much usage as possible and say, well, how do we get it to the point where it's a constant conversation? And I don't mean it's a constant conversation if we're sending surveys out to people every 5 minutes. It's you have agency and ongoing involvement. We probably all have the NHS app on our phone, for example. So there are mechanisms of that we could engage people through. The question is, how do we bridge that gap between healthcare and research, and how do we also have mechanisms to do it? And our response was the sort of patient data account model that's embedded within that lattice proposal I had up earlier. I'm sure there are many other ways of doing it, but I do think that's got to be a fundamental design principle going forward.
So I'm in no way saying that we don't need to involve the public in this and their take. I think there are challenges of where we balance that. So anyone's individual data may be used in 5,000 research projects, 10,000 research projects. So is it practical to be asking people about their data, but also like on that level of granularity? I mean, maybe you can say, is it a purely academic one, or is it do you want your data to be used by commercial entities, for instance? That might be a sort of the level of question to ask. But on a per project basis, it's going to be exceptionally hard when there are tens of thousands of projects ongoing at any one time at least. And one of the sort of the questions that we've been asking of the public is people give very, very different answers when there are certain questions. And I've seen surveys going out there saying, do you want your data to be used for research, this, that, and the other? And they're not actually qualifying that data is de-identified data where all that's captured is an ID and a read code and you know, something like really, really anonymous information about them, and it's viewed within a TRE, and you've only got access to a certain number. Those qualifiers as to how their data is used safely is not used in some of these surveys. And for me, you get very, very different answers when you do that. And I do have a real concern that if you're asking people to, if you're not explaining those things, but you're asking people to opt out of lots of different criteria, we're going to end up with getting a very biased answer. And we're going to have a load of people who are not going to participate in research, and we're not going to be able to actually analyze that proportion, and that will be an unbiased representative of people, and we won't get the right answers for kind of research in the public benefit. That's my personal take rather than any organizational take.
So I'm not an expert and I don't have great solutions in this space, but I do observe that across Europe, the cultures are very, very different, and they tend to be sort of nationwide. So the Nordic countries have a particular trust of their authorities and their data handlers, and other European countries, maybe for historical reasons, have slightly less trust of their centralized authorities. And I would say within the UK, that could probably shift almost overnight with a couple of newspaper headlines as well. So I think everybody working in this space kind of has a duty to do a good job, because a small number of stories in one country could very quickly shift public opinion in one direction or the other. I know for everyone, it's very burdensome having to track individual consents through an information system, but I think it's something we just always have to deal with.
That's all the time that we have. In fact, I've been very bad and we've gone 5 minutes over. However, incredible conversation. Thank you so much to each of you for participating in this, particularly James and Darren for your excellent presentations. And I shall hand it back over. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks to the panel. Thanks for sharing it so well and winging it so well. As you can tell, we make everything collaboratively. Everything is community-led, including how the day is run. So now we are going to break into breakout rooms. We are going to be having discussions focused on accelerating digital science. The idea is in these breakout rooms, kind of use them to know each other. We're going to kind of mix you all up a bit. So hopefully you will be sitting or discussing with someone that you don't work with. So spend some time presenting yourselves. Please nominate someone that will take notes. Hackathons are all ready, right? Yes, we have hackathons for everyone to choose one. And take notes of today. That's what allows us to kind of do nice summaries of the day and put them online. We rely completely on what you write. And then, yeah, this is kind of the focus of the day, is where this community is going. We have some, for example, the MRC proposal for digital research infrastructure in 2035 for reference, if that's something that you kind of consult. What's the vision there, if that's of any help. And what's stopping Federation today, kind of continuing from the topic that we have been discussing there this morning. How do we get there, and how do we make that happen as a community? So link that back to what this community can do to get us there. Other than that, yeah, just enjoy the discussions. If you just scan the QR on the screen, that should work.
Yeah, I'll just have to use another device. Thank you.
Bring up the recording link. Yes.
Hello, everyone. Okay, so we've got the penultimate session now, which is the lightning talks. How this is going to work is every speaker gets, I think it's 4 minutes. I'm going to set a timer on my phone, which makes a loud noise when you get to 4 minutes.
All right. So we're here to talk to you today about our work around semi-automating data provenance in TREs. So the problem that we were facing within our TRE at the University of Aberdeen was that we would do lots of data processing on behalf of researchers, and they just saw this as a black box. We couldn't share code with them because it was oftentimes sensitive information, even in the extraction and linkage codes. And we were finding that our researchers didn't really have trust and confidence in the work that we were doing, even though we were data scientists. So working with Milan, we looked at how we could actually bring in data provenance. So that's information about entities, activities, and people involved in producing a piece of data. So that way we could improve quality, reliability, and trustworthiness within the sensitive data environment. We used the Provo ontology, which defines classes of data and properties of data, and allowed us to actually start mapping out a full data linkage, data extraction and linkage exercise. On the left, we had a simple mapping that was just 2 data sets, but when we actually did a full mapping of all of the different steps, decisions, et cetera, that the data analysts were making as they were extracting and linking data, you can see what that looked like. We then expanded the provenance ontology for within that ontological model. So, and we were able to actually link all of those different properties together with the classes. We then created a machine-readable provenance trace and interface. So you can see here some of what we were doing in terms of structuring those steps within that mapping process. We were then able to package all of that up into RO crates to create a readable, human readable interface that allowed us to query all of the data processing steps. All of this is online and I'll have the web link up for it. But we also then did quite a lot of work with our public contributors. So we actually involved them in the evaluation of our interface, and the public were really helpful in terms of identifying a number of key steps that we also needed to have. So they didn't want like red and green, for example, in terms of comparisons, because they felt that that was would make somebody quite lazy if somebody passed or if something was correct in terms of that processing. So we worked on the principle of yellow and orange. And then we also had, the public were really focused on us being able to comment in anything that was a decision that wasn't necessarily captured within the interface. What we are looking to do next is actually introduce this across multiple environments where processors may be processing on 2 different platforms. We also are keen to actually include any data that researchers are producing from the data that we provide to them. So to create a full ingress to egress pipeline, and we'd like to create dashboards tailored to specific user types. And just wanted to say a massive thank you to Dare UK, who funded this work for us. We had a number of partners across the UK, and particularly our colleagues in the Aberdeen Centre for Health Data Science and the Grampian Data Safe Haven. That is where everything is available open source. So if you go there, we have all of our code, all of our model, like all of the interface, etc. And also happy, Milan and I, to answer any questions.
Okay. All right, ready to go? Yep. Right, okay. So ODRL stands for Open Digital Rights Language. Now, in terms of defining a problem statement, I can give you an insight into what we currently do at the UK Data Service and the way we classify our data. So we have a 3-tier model of open, safeguarded and closed. Actually, that's wrong. It should be controlled. But under safeguarded, that's actually 2 completely different categories: end user license and special license. All of these are at one level, not arbitrary, but very kind of approximations of what's actually happening with the access conditions. So, I mean, it is all bad really, because mediating access to digital objects, it's excessively human mediated. Nothing wrong with humans per se. I don't have anything against humans, but they don't do things in repeatable and predictable ways. Access policies are locally defined, bespoke on a per-use basis sometimes. The lack of upstream access metadata at the moment makes machine actionability just a distant pipe dream. There just isn't sufficient information to actually make this stuff machine actionable. Across the board, whether that's Europe or the UK, you can see here just a tiny section of the problem, the way different organisations do their access categories, closed access, embargoed. Everyone does it differently, and there's no good reason, because most people are doing kind of the same thing with the same forms, the same workflows, and the same kind of researcher communities. So ODRL is a W3C model that's been around for quite a few years. That looks a bit scary, but it's actually quite straightforward if you hone in on the important bits. ODRL parties are essentially actors, you might call them in Provo, or agents. ODRL rules are basically permissions or duties or prohibitions. And those, once defined, define actions, which is where machines can start to interpret that and do useful things in a particular sequence or in parallel. ODRL assets are just another name for digital objects, and policies encapsulate all of those in what you might think of as a traditional license statement. So a simple use case, this is a bit of JSON LD that marks up an ODRL license. This is more machine readable than machine actionable, but that gives you a flavor of the syntax. Now, in terms of more complex use cases and where this might ultimately lead is if we start to think about consolidation, as I was referencing earlier, there's no reason why you couldn't have a national access brokerage that could basically process all researcher applications through a central portal or a central brokerage rather, and devolve the actual policy negotiations, the kind of back and forth messaging with downstream repositories. Now, this isn't really happening in the UK at the moment, but I'm working with SurfSAR in the Netherlands because they are deadly serious about doing this in the Netherlands. So ODRL really is the only game in town at the moment for marking up machine actionable workflows and making federation and machine actionable federation a reality. Okay, thank you. You want the clicker?
Probably, thank you. All right, hi everyone. I'm here to introduce myself, Izzy Hampson, and also my team, which is the Data Access Policy team in the Department for Health and Social Care, who many of you may have interacted with before. I'm quite new, but we sit in a joint team with the NHS. I'm very keen to engage with you more at lots of these meetings, so I thought I'd give a bit of an initial background to us and our work. So this is our summary of who we are. We're the policy side of the NHS Research Secure Data Environment Network, who are going to become the primary route to access NHS data for research purposes. I think this is the reminder of the Data for R&D programme, who are the delivery arm of our policy work. And I think at your April meeting, you had Chris Russell come and present on this. So this will be the SDE network at the England level, which has been mentioned a couple of times already today. So our policy directions that we've set so far are that data access for NHS data is going to become default rather than data dissemination. We know that this is quite a big change, so it's going to be phased. It's not going to be switched off overnight. And data sharing will continue in a very few limited scenarios. A colleague of mine's working and putting in place a robust SDE accreditation model for these NHS SDEs. And in the future, we don't expect solely commercial or academic controlled SDEs to be hosting NHS data. the network will be default. We're working to consolidate multiple data access routes down into data access committees. And interesting, based on some of the citizens' voices discussions today, we've got a very exciting kind of first of its kind for government, really large scale public engagement program that's quite exciting. Let's get past that slide again. So hopefully you'll be able to access these slides in some way to look at this in your own time, because it's a fair amount of detail. But this is our waterfall timeline of what we have achieved and published in 3 different publications so far. We're now in phase 4. And I do have to caveat that this, the previous publications we've made were all under the previous government. And we all know we've had a government change this year. So this is our indicative timeline and our proposed future steps now, that we're focusing on the SDE accreditation, the data access reform, committee reform. And myself, I've joined the team to work on the health data access ecosystem for research, mapping and shaping. So a lot of the things about harmonisation and federation across and defragmentation will sit with me. And everything is underpinned, as I said, by our large-scale public engagement programme at the bottom there. And that's a really quick summary of everything we do. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Katie Oldfield. I'm with Research Data Scotland. I'm the Public Engagement Manager. So I'm going to speak a little bit about some of the different ways that we involve and engage the public in our work, because a lot of you are doing the same kind of thing and some of it might be helpful, and we're always happy to share and work collaboratively with people. So for those of you who don't know, Research Data Scotland was set up in 2021. It's a not-for-profit funded by the Scottish Government with the aim to make it faster and simpler for researchers to access public sector data. This includes widening the number and variety of data sets available, as well as launching and now improving our researcher access service, which will be a one access point for researchers to access public sector data in Scotland. So as part of all that work, we're leading the transformation of the data system in Scotland. So as the Public Engagement Manager, I'm obviously very interested in where the public sits in all of this. It's data about them, and it's for researchers doing research in the public good. So they're really at the core of it. So some of the ways that we involve the public in our work is we've got a public panel called Scotland Talks Data. We meet 5 times a year. We always put on our website the topics that are covered in those panel sessions. And if anyone is interested in more information about what we cover, then there's contact information you can always ask, and we're kind of happy to help. We also have members of the public that sit on project teams, and we carry out public workshops about particular projects. So some of the things that we're looking at the moment is private sector access. And also, as was sort of mentioned earlier, which was really nice to hear, about the role of the public in how their data is used. Is it on a project level? Is it at data sourcing level? Where can the public sit and influence? So that's a topic that we're really interested in at the moment. We also have just today launched a public engagement fund. So we fund projects to engage with people, particularly communities or individuals that might not involve themselves in data science, to find out more and get involved. It's focused on audiences and communities in Scotland, but application can be from anywhere in the UK. So if there's something you're interested in trying out and need a bit of money for it, then take a look at that. In our engage and communicate section, we try and be as transparent as possible. Our comms team put a lot of work into our website to have data explainers that are very kind of publicly accessible explanations of what happens with the data and why. We're really happy for people to use those. We have videos that are listed under Creative Commons licenses. So we're very happy for those to use as well. And we're also going out and about to more public events and festivals. We've got something at the end of this month using Lego chests and Kaplunk to show how data is kept safe whilst making it easier for researchers to access. There's a couple of things to look out for. One was mentioned earlier is PEDRI, so Research Data Scotland is part of PEDRI, which is a collaboration of organisations that are looking to improve and encourage public involvement and engagement in data research initiatives. There's going to be an email coming around to the TRE community about a roundtable to help identify the challenges of doing public involvement engagement in project level TREs. So if this is an area that you're interested in or your institution is, then please look out for that and get involved. And finally, if you felt like this talk was too short and could be enjoyed from the comfort of your own desk, on the 2nd of October, we have a showcase where we'll be covering lots of different areas that Research Data Scotland currently is doing, including a longer section about public engagement.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Okay, so I'm George Sporowski. I'm a research software engineer at UCL's Advanced Research Computing, and we're building a new TRE. Of course, with associated governance and service management. So just to kind of summarize the goals of this TRE. So the intention is, of course, for all of ARC's, so Advanced Research Computing's, platforms and services to be trusted. They're already for research, so they're all going to be a TRE. Of course, our initial focus is on building kind of a conventional TRE that you might that you might be familiar with, which is just a remote a way to get remote desktop and additional compute for working on tier 3 data. We're building that in a way that is maximizes automation. So we've got infrastructure as code. We're building it DevOps. It's continuously deployed into production, and part of that is also building it in such a way so it's a single code base, and part of that is building it in such a way that it's platform agnostic. So it's able at some point to become a reusable TRE. So the code base will be made open source, and the idea is then people will be able to reuse it and fork it. Our focus is on reproducible science, and what I mean by that is obviously following ARC's mission to encourage reproducible science. So repeatability is important. So we're building it with containers in mind for the scientific software. And so, of course, I was in the cybersecurity conversation this morning. And simplifying it is super important for us for robustness. So hopefully you'll see it's really quite simple. At the moment, you'll see it says AWS at the top there. That's strange. So currently we're building it on AWS because our internal private cloud, the new internal private cloud that ARC is building, is not yet ready. So this is an example of us being able to lift and shift it. So at some point we will lift and shift it from AWS onto our private cloud. The primary way that things are isolated is via these projects. These are network isolated by the underlying platform. And then, of course, there's a system of airlocks to get, this is fairly conventional, there's a system of airlocks to get data in and some method of getting data out. So the fundamental thing is layered. So at the bottom layer, we have the compute platform. Then we infrastructure as code, deploy security controls onto that to create these project enclaves. And then finally, the software for the projects themselves is also airlocked in as container images and then run as containers on those desktops and on other compute nodes that might be available within the project. So just to summarize, we're building it in a compute platform agnostic way, and we're demonstrating that by doing our own lifting and shifting. We're encouraging managed research software, so containers. And as part of this project, we will also be developing a methodology for having templated project setups. So obviously that what you saw there with the simple projects was very simple. We want to also be able to deploy, for example, standardized bioinformatics projects, standardized domain-specific projects. So come and talk to me if you would like to learn more. That's it.
Then it would be 80 burns.
I was about to put the mic down there, that wouldn't help whatsoever. So thanks very much for having me. My name's Jen Muir. I work for Research Data Scotland as a senior data analyst. I've recently become involved in a project called Connect4, which is what I wanted to come and talk to you about today. So I'll just briefly outline the project and then highlight an element that I'm working on, which is the roadmap on the slide. So Connect4 is an ESRC funded project. It was part of the Future Data Services funding call, and there's various partners involved. So Research Data Scotland is one of them, then Integrated Data Service, which is delivered through ONS in partnership with XGov. There's also EPCC who are leading the project, Public Health Scotland and National Records of Scotland. It's a really short time scale on this one as well. So started in April this year, ends in March next year. And the problem that we're trying to solve is where researchers needing access to sensitive public data owned by 2 or more UK public organisations to analyse the data for public benefit. How do they find what data is suitable across different organisations? How do they obtain access? How do they bring data sets together, and how do they get access to the outputs as well? So a key challenge for researchers is to answer research questions where data sets must be combined before analysis, and where those data sets are from 2 or more organisations and owned by more than one accredited processing environment. So a couple of barriers that were identified were researchers being unable to assess whether combining data sets is actually feasible using free text metadata descriptions, and also the policies governing access are specific between data owners and the TREs. The policies aren't compatible and they don't specify how to enable combinations with data from other TREs. So the kind of project objective is to agree and start to deliver a roadmap focused on federation initially between IDS and Scottish National Safe Haven, development rich metadata for the analysis of federated sensitive data is another element. So there's 3 work packages involved in the project, and the development of the roadmap is work package 1. It's the one I'm leading on, and that's the one I wanted to sort of highlight to you today. So the roadmap's a collaborative effort between IDS and RDS, and we've mapped the current processes and researcher journeys across both IDS and the Scottish National Safe Haven for accessing data, outlining the different steps involved. And so that's from kind of researcher data discovery piece at the very, very beginning, right to who does the output checks at the end. So this exercise has let us see where things are the same, kind of areas for development, opportunities for alignment, and potential risks and barriers. It's helping us understand what actually needs to be in place to set up an enduring service for researchers across IDS and Scottish National Safe Haven. But we really want to keep the UK nations involved for this exercise. It's important to aim for compatibility across the 4 sort of UK national TREs. So that was the key reason for wanting to speak to you today as well, to highlight that this project is going on, and we're really keen to hear from lots of people, input, opinions, expertise. So please, anything you've got to say, I would like to hear it. Please get in touch. And the massive failing on my part is not putting my email address on that slide. So apologies, you can get me obviously here, grab me. I will ask Simon possibly to add that to materials. But yeah, anything at all, would love to hear it. Thank you very much. Key to go. Thanks.
Oh, Ted, is not mine. Am I going the wrong way? There we go. Right.
Okay,
Cool. All right. Hi everyone, I'm Katie. I'm a partner at a consultancy, please no booze, called the PSC, and I'm here to talk about a really cool project we did with the UK earlier this year. So the goal was all about focusing on cross-domain use research and how if you bring 50 researchers together, you might be able to get £50 billion worth of public benefit. So the goal was to have a workshop with people from lots of different research councils, as well as the public, to come up with new applications for cross-domain research. So we had really good representation from all of the research councils. And we did a bunch of activities and exercises to try and get people to think creatively about how we could link different data sets for different benefits. And then we did analysis on the use cases that we developed. So we developed about 50, and this shows how common it was to link different types of data. So it's pretty unsurprising maybe that health and social data were linked very commonly, and people are very interested in that. It's also kind of interesting to note that maybe people are less interested in linking commercial data to pretty much anything. So that could be an area for a bit more exploration and focus. We also looked at the benefits. So where could this type of research take us? And we found that it was really skewing to some of society's most intractable issues. So inequality, climate change, the productivity problem, and obesity, these are all things that people have really struggled to get a grip on and do anything about. And actually we found that the cross-domain perspectives helped us to take a new angle on these problems and might be able to help out, which was really cool to see. And further to that, we also looked at the potential economic benefits, since that's what spending reviews and business cases tend to want to see. So for each of the top use cases, we tried to do some economic benefits and came up with many billions of pounds. And also we found that the research community were pretty grateful so far for the fact that we did this, because they've said we don't often see these sorts of cost estimates for children and adults' mental health, for example. So it was really good to be able to get a second view on how these benefits might be able to help society and the economy as well. I will hand over briefly to.
Thanks. I'm Balint. I'm a program manager at DARE UK and led on the DARE side of this work. I just want to say two things really. Just thank you firstly to the PSC for your hard work and dedication on this project. It's been a pleasure working with you. Thank you also to the workshop participants, many of whom are in this room. It was really their energy and enthusiasm that made the day what it was. And secondly, I think as people work in TREs, we think a lot about data security and how we protect people's privacy. And what this work was really about was what's the actual benefit in doing so. And Darren talked about this in terms of keeping the researcher front of mind when we're thinking about TRE capabilities. This was really extrapolating that one step further to think about the benefit that can be brought to the public if that research is possible. And DARE UK, as we move into phase 2, will be enhancing TRE capabilities to enable exactly this kind of interdisciplinary cross-domain research, and Fergus will be taking us through that later this afternoon. Thank you.
In sub, cross-domain research is really cool. The benefits are there, and there's potentially untapped opportunities as well. And it's good for the economy, good for society, good for everyone. There you go.
James will have.
I guess right. This way.
Yes.
Hi, yeah, I'm going to talk about the Data Safe Haven, which is an open source TRE in the cloud that's been developed at the Alan Turing Institute. So the project's about a couple of different things. So partly open infrastructure, partly open standardized governance, and partly about community participation. So why do we think you ought to use an open source TRE? So better code quality, it's customizable, you don't have to pay licensing costs, and you can be part of a community trying to solve problems together for everyone. So our open source system, we're using it in production. It lets us deploy reproducible environments. It's customizable to our needs, and it's being used by others who've also customized it to their needs as well. Some of them are on this slide here. So what does our TRE look like? It's made up of built on these other technologies. We've used it to enable lots of research at the Turing. So I think about 70 different partners have provided us data that's been used inside the TRE. Some of them are here from government, industry, and third sector. Our standardized governance is really about several different things. So partly a way of classifying different projects. So by sort of how sensitive we think the work that's going on in the project is. Partly about trainings for data handling for our users. And our operators, and partly about the flexible security controls that let us adapt the security of the environment according to what kind of project's going on. So our sensitivity tiers, you may or may not have seen this before, comes from a design paper from I think 2018. We have this these 5 different categories of type of project, ranging from something using completely publicly available open information that really doesn't need to be in a TRE, right through to stuff that we think is quite serious. Maybe, you know, state actors might want to attack it. So the way our classification works, we do it through consensus. We want agreement from the investigators of the project, from the people providing the data, and also from someone representing the Turing's interests to make sure, you know, we're covering our own sort of data protection requirements there. I mentioned community participation before. So obviously, you know, part of the UK TRE community, we've been part of SATRA. We're supporting the East Midlands SDE who are using our code. We've been hopefully, you know, we've been working with DARE phase 1. Hopefully we'll hear more about DARE phase 2 funding later on today. And also we've been working with HDR UK as well. So just a sort of a diagram of how this, you know, our safe haven could be used in other people's environments. This is a quick like overview of how it's being used by the East Midlands SDE. So, you know, they're combining their data with data from the NHS nationally, and they've got, you know, sort of inbound and outbound airlocks, as George mentioned earlier, pretty standard kind of architecture, and they're using our code there to do the actual data analysis in. Yeah, so please do get involved. There's lots of, you know, links here for if you want more information. We've got documentation, we've got Slack workspace, email list, our code's publicly available. As of last week, our code is now available on PyPy, so you can just pip install it and go ahead from there. Thank you very much.
Lewis Hodgkiss next, and then after that, Lee Frisco.
It's upside down again. No? There we go. So at Deep UK, we've had around 42 AI applications just this year. And this is mainly down to our neuroimaging data collection. So we have around 130,000 brain scans all standardized and processed to a common format. And so this has been a great resource for developing AI on. But of course, there's lots of different privacy concerns when it comes to releasing AI models from a trusted research environment, and many different risk considerations to take into account, such as the data type, the models being developed, where that model is being released to, and the sort of attacks that the model's prone to as well. So we were funded by DARE UK to establish an AI risk evaluation group to look into the risks of these more complex data types like neuroimaging and genomics, and the challenges that they pose to implementing things like privacy-enhancing technologies. We also wanted to develop assessment methodologies to help data owners comfortably assess AI model projects. So there's a few key recommendations from this workshop. And the big one was providing alternative secure solutions to releasing AI model projects. Researchers were concerned about the cost, time, resources, and energy needed to implement PETs into their research. But by providing secure alternative solutions like federation to enable access to external data sets for fine-tuning or validation, or sharing the model via the TRE instead of publishing on GitHub, or deploying it within the TRE as well to enable that to be used in practice. But of course, there's some projects which do still want to release their AI model from the TRE, so we developed comprehensive assessment methodologies to enable this to happen within our decision-making process. And at the release stage, depending on where that model is being released to, we have different processes, assessments, and agreements that we can put in place to enable those AI model projects to be released and implemented. Regarding our assessment methodologies, one of these was the AI risk matrix, which we developed from the results of our workshops, which takes into account things like data types, AI models, where that model is being released to, and we can see how the risk score changes for different types of AI model projects. We also assess different types of privacy-preserving techniques, their ease of implementation, effect on utility, and the protection that they give. But in all cases, we kind of found that researchers really lack the understanding and ability to be able to implement these privacy-preserving techniques into their research. So this is why we've been developing learning material with data size, which is supported by ADR UK, to enable researchers to understand the risks of AI in their projects, how these can be appropriately mitigated given the sort of data types or models that they may be using, and how they can evaluate privacy in their AI models. We've also been working on developing tools within Deep UK as well to enable researchers to implement privacy-preserving techniques into their models. One of these is differentially private synthetic data, where we've developed a simple-to-use framework for optimizing the trade-off between privacy and utility in synthetic data, so that we can generate differentially private data sets for training AI models on. with nice interpretable evaluation metrics as well. So with all these processes and assessment methodologies that we've put in place, we've really been able to enable a lot of AI model projects to take place within the portal. And we work actively with lots of different universities across the world to enable them to implement AI models trained on our sensitive data into places like the NHS or clinical practice. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so yeah, I'm Chris Cole. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm a reader in health informatics at the University of Dundee and academic co-director of the Health Informatics Centre. And I'll be talking to you about the SARTRA project that actually, interestingly, was effectively born here 2 years ago, which is kind of a nice little homecoming about that. So what is it? The one-line sentence is, I guess, a guide on how to build and run TREs. And it's built around some architectural principles and 4 pillars, and it's basically, well, not basically, but essentially it's 29 capabilities, which we wrote down into and broken down into a bunch of statements, some of which are mandatory. You can see it here if you have more to see it in more detail. And this is what it looks like. It's essentially a website, but there's a link to a spreadsheet. Very basic, but actually quite useful in terms of self-evaluating yourself and your TRE against the 160 statements. And you can score yourself against those in a 0 to 2 scoring system. And I wanted to update today on what we've done since the release of the publication last October. And essentially the whole of the Scottish Safe Haven network has now self-assessed themselves against the specification through a project that's funded through RDS. So thank you very much, RDS, for funding that. And we've done a very nice little schematic of that. So the score is 0 to 2. So it's like red, green, amber sort of thing. And we can see that if you look at just the mandatory ones, actually we identified a couple of places where actually we didn't get full agreement and not everyone was meeting all the mandatory requirements. And actually, after a bit of discussion, we understood it was more of a conceptual difference rather than actual failure, as it were. Not that you can fail SARTRA, really. So that was really interesting as a discussion point. So I'd like to do more of this with and do this more kind of visual analysis work of people together with the current version of the specification. And interestingly, Iridia wrote a really nice blog on this. I think Scott Russell was on the call online, who's from Iridia, and so this was a really nice way of describing their experience of doing this. So it was really nice to see and interesting to see that there was commercial interest, vendor interest in this. So we've got a survey out last week or a couple of weeks ago. So please fill it in to find, and so you can give your input on where you are on your journey with SARTRA, if you're on the journey at all. Actually, we've had quite a lot of people saying that have evaluated against the TRE, which is great. And most or a lot of them are willing to share the results. We'd like to have a community desktop of where people are sitting in the spectrum of SARTRA specification. You should know by now, I should be able to pronounce it, but anyway. And it's also being used as a baseline specification for the EOSC Entrust project, which started in March, 3-year project with many, many different partners. And it's been really useful in that point in terms of a starting point, but obviously highlighted some issues that we need to fill, which leads into their phase 2, which I won't steal Fergus's thunder, but we'd like to respond to community feedback that we've had, maybe improve the evaluation mechanism, and look at some federated applications of things, and longer term a maturity model or accreditation plan. So that, you know, we're looking at trying to see how we can improve the SARTRA specificity and the usability in the future. If you want to find out more, please contact me, and that's our link to our TRE in Dundee. Thank you.
Right, so thanks to all the speakers for some great talks. We do have one question that came in online Who are the key contacts to discuss this federation project within ONS and Research Data Scotland? I'm guessing that's probably for Jen.
Yep, so that would be myself, and it's jennifer.muir@researchdata.scot email address, or look at the research data website and you can contact me through that. There's also Emily Simmons from ONS, who I'm collaborating with on it.
Okay, so we'll be sharing the slides online as always, assuming everyone's happy to, and we can also add sort of email addresses, telephone numbers if you want, or whatever as well. We can sort that out later. Are there any other questions? In that case, could you join me in giving thanks again to the speakers for some great talks and for keeping to time? Yeah. Oh, I don't know, that's a clicker, which has disappeared. Okay, so while we get this up, I'm very pleased to introduce our last speaker, which is Fergus MacDonald from DARE. And as you've probably heard from everyone else's hints, he's going to be talking about DARE Phase 2.
Thanks, everyone. It is a double act. So Emily, it'll be me and Emily who'll be presenting, and Emily will be kicking us off. So yeah.
Fantastic. So if I'm not mistaken, are we 15 minutes early? So that means I can like elongate my talk for at least 15 minutes and go into great detail on DARE, right?
So while I'll just probably mention, after this presentation, we have Q&A, and we're going to have a wrap-up session. What we probably do, if everyone's up for it, is for all the breakout rooms, if someone can maybe volunteer, just to give a very short summary of what we discussed this afternoon. So I'm afraid, Emily, no, you can't go over too long.
So that's a shame. You all wanted to know the ins and outs of our new exciting DARE brand, which I was going to talk to you about in great detail. I'm going to work on I'm going to work on my backflips. So while they're getting our lovely slides up, I just want to say I'm utterly delighted that Fergus has stepped up into a new role of interim deputy director of DARE. I'm currently interim director of DARE. We are looking to resolve this, and there will be some new leadership coming down the line. Many of you have been asking us for quite some months, where are we up to with DARE Phase 2? We've been working with the board across a lot of UK RI councils, and we have spent the last 18 months coming up with the new DARE brand. So I hope you appreciate that there's some significant work going into this. Oh, thank you very much. And this we all have to thank Wesley up there. So if Wesley wants to take credit for all of the beautiful new colours that we've got on our brand, that would be amazing. You see, I am not cool enough for school for that. Mine would have been very, very, very dull. Anyway, so without further ado, we are delighted that we can talk a little bit more about what DARE Phase 2 will look like. We have a new vision, and that is for all research and innovation to benefit from seamless, secure use of diverse, sensitive data at a pace, efficiency, and scale approaching that of open data systems, because we don't want it to be exactly the same as open data systems, because otherwise we're not going to have the review of all of the good things in terms of the security and the public benefit and things. But we want to get it as automated as possible. We want to make sure that it's safe and secure, and we want to revolutionize research and productivity and accelerate research to deliver public good. And the mission is to put the UK in the forefront of sensitive data research by innovation and assembling the tools, technologies and standards needed to streamline secure linkage and use, which is great because that's what we're all here for. So hopefully you're happy with those visions and missions. So we did quite a bit of work around the kind of the main gaps. We've worked on all of the different real world exemplars. We worked out that we need some real world exemplars to help us with all of these different things. And then we want to get to the end exciting goal of transforming this landscape. So you'll all be very aware of the various different reports that have been done over the last few years, all of which have said, we really need to do this. We really need to get behind it. We need to have the UK as a place to come. We've got some fantastic data. Let's make it happen. But then how do you make it happen? It's that bit that's the hard bit. So I'm not going to go through all of these different white papers. But this diagram that generated by AI essentially shows that we've got these different railway tracks at different gauges, and we're trying to put those together into one coherent system. Even if you just look at different funders, you've got MRC working in a very, very different way to BBSRC and a different way to EPSRC. So you've got the funders working differently. We've got different data sets with different provenance, with different structures, etc. And we're trying to have different TREs working across these different environments in a consistent way so that we can actually have UK data at scale. So how do we get all of these things working together so that you've got an infrastructure in place that can actually make sure that we're getting the railway tracks joining up together? So we saw very briefly on a lovely lightning talk about the work that we've done, just bringing together people into the same room and saying, right, if you take away all of the challenges, because everybody's like, oh, this is really difficult, we can't possibly do this. If you just ignore all of those challenges and you just get people into a room and say, let's think about the blue skies, let's think about what you want to be able to do. The whole room changes. You're not thinking about the challenges anymore. You're thinking about the exciting problems that you can ask. And we got a very, very large group of diverse people into a room, and they came up with 52 different use cases just really quickly, just in terms of the data that they'd like to answer these questions. And we then got a very, very large number of by 2050, what's the economic benefit of being able to answer those policy questions and then make some changes with things? And it was enormous. So it's there. We need to get to that situation. So we're very much hoping that DARE can work across all of these various different people working in this space and bring people together to try and have a transformational impact in this area. So if we look at the challenges, though, we've got a very large number of additional TREs building up over the time. And this graph here was just from a survey that we did. So I'm sure we missed many different TREs that didn't fill it in. So there's lots and lots of them. There's a lack of interoperability across them. Researchers must learn different environments and processes. It's costly to set up. And it's limited cost parity across the different research infrastructures. There's some that are core funded, other ones that are cost recovery, and it's very, very difficult to get that across the landscape. We think, though, that move to TREs is a positive change, increases public trust, enables sensitive data, which might not have otherwise been done. And one thing that I'm utterly delighted to see is that there's a really big change in the last 3 years in terms of TREs. Rather than working in complete competition with each other, we're now all in the same room together, and that feels really, really different, apart from those online that couldn't be bothered to come to Newcastle. But apart from all of them, it is really nice to see everybody all collaborating and coming together, and it does feel very different than it did even 3 years ago. So in phase 1, design and dialogue, we did a load of really cool outputs. We've even seen some of the talks today. We're talking about the work that was funded as part of their phase 1, and that was fab. And then we needed to do an exercise to say, right, where do we want to go to next? How do we learn from all of these different things? So we are now going on to DARE phase 2, and I'm going to pass you over to my lovely colleague.
Cool. Thanks, Em. So that's sort of the announcement. I don't know if there should be like a yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. Yep. So DARE phase 2. So starting in August, going to the end of fiscal year 26-27. So around 2.5 years, and that's to a total funding of up to £20.6 million over that period of time. I'm going to talk a little bit about what phase 2 is sort of going to be about. I'm going to give you a high level sense of sort of the structure of phase 2, how we're thinking about it. You know, there's a lot of detail in here that I won't necessarily get into today, just in terms of time. But of course, you know, I'm here to have conversations on the side, and this will all be communicated as we go. So fundamentally, what is phase 2 about? And I'm preaching to the converted here. I don't think this is, you know, revolutionary per se, but really it is about both intra-TRE capabilities, so supporting TREs to evolve the capabilities that they provide to researchers themselves as TREs to their users, their researchers. And then, of course, how, and this is the big federation sort of theme that's come out of this morning and has been ongoing for a couple of years now, how do we support and enable TREs to work with each other more routinely, more easily, and efficiently, and again, to deliver at the end better services to researchers so they can, you know, provide all of that positive impetus to the economy, to society, etc., that we've touched on already. So I'm going to give you a sort of high level, these are sort of each of the components of phase 2. So the first is what we call transformational programs, and there's sort of 3 components of this program of work. And I will go into these in a little bit more detail. This is just sort of the overview. The first is bringing some of the new capabilities that we developed as part of phase 1 of DARE UK closer to production readiness. So phase 1, there was a lot of work done on these sort of new capabilities, whether that was federation capabilities, whether that was capabilities like the partial automation of output checking. And really a lot of these were pretty early work. It was still pretty proof of concept prototype work. And so we want to basically carry some of that work forward and actually bring it closer to production readiness so that it can actually be implemented in sort of a real world TRE setting, doing real research, which then leads to the second point, which is really getting sort of a coalition of the willing TREs on board to support with testing, configuring, and then ultimately adopting these capabilities that we're looking to mature. And then, of course, linked to that at the end would be supporting researchers who are trying to answer difficult cross-domain research questions that are for public benefit, to use these capabilities that have been tested by TREs to answer actual research questions. So this is sort of the first big component, the transformational programs component of the program. The second is, you may remember from phase 1 of DARE UK, we had a portfolio of sort of short, very sort of sprint style projects. We will be doing that again. And this is really about tackling things that we just haven't managed to tackle. This might be emerging themes, new thinking, new challenges for TREs that have basically emerged over the last couple of years that DARE UK has been around. And of course, before that. So this is really a portfolio of sort of prototyping, proof of concept, early work. And it was a very useful mechanism, very high pressure mechanism, I will admit as well, but it was a useful mechanism for doing things quickly and tackling new things in a sort of agile prototype proof of concept way. We are going to be doing some early testing on what a national network of TREs could look like. So that's really, you know, talking about the federation sort of pictures that we all have, the mental models that we have in our head. It's really about, can we come to a sort of shared mental model, and then can we do some really early testing and sort of how that could work at a sort of network infrastructure level. And Rob, who's sitting over there, is definitely your man if you want to talk through this in a little bit more detail. Then the community building work. So, you know, basically supporting communities like this one, right? So there is a community building strand of work, and this is, I'll go into a bit more detail, but it's really just about promoting information sharing. It's for communities like this to come together to provide the overhead, you know, essentially the resource so that, you know, days like this can be organized and communities like this can come together. Yeah, and yeah, okay, yes, and this, yeah. And that last point is pretty important. It is about trying to build consensus around not only good practice and agreeing what good practice is, but also starting to work towards common standards. And standards, you know, there's many different standards here, so there's a lot under that. Okay, I'm going to go into a little bit, oh, sorry, final point to make on here. And because I'm not going to talk through this in detail, partly because we're still probably trying to figure out exactly how that needs to look with some of this work. But there will be public involvement and engagement embedded throughout all of these programs of work. It will look different for each of those programs of work because they are different. And there will be public involvement and engagement work at a sort of DARE UK programmatic level, so to sort of overarching umbrella level as well. So I've just thought to call that out. It does feel like I was chatting with Wesley, like we've missed this a little bit today. It hasn't come up too much, and maybe that's a bit of feedback for the next meeting we have. So in terms of the transformational programs, this is sort of what we're thinking about, right? So it's building on the work of phase one. It is building on both some of the work of the Sprint exemplar projects, but also the driver projects that happen in the second half of phase one. And so it's really about, how do we do federated projects, federated analysis across TREs? How do we do that in a way that is fit for purpose, that addresses different kinds of research use cases? It's about how do we do, and this is very pertinent given, I think it was Lewis's talk as well, how do we do, lightning talk, how do we do AI model training in TREs, right? How do we do that? How do we bring those models in safely? How do we export those models safely? What is our approach as a community to AI model training on sensitive data? Public sensitive data, I should say. How do we do semi-automated disclosure control? There was a great work done on this in phase one. It's about carrying that work forward. It's about, looking at how that relates to, AI model training, for example. But it's really about how do we start to introduce more automation into the processes that make TREs operate so they're more efficient. Trying to move the expertise that we have in the UK and TREs to the more sort of high impact, high value work rather than that which really a machine can do. And then finally, continue towards common standards. Chris has already sort of mentioned the SARTRA specification, which we think is really good work. How do we, as a community, continue to sort of come towards common standards, common definitions, if you like, at the right level of detail for what TREs are, and in fact for what federation is, what a network of TREs looks like, etc. So this is really about evolving that work and building on that work. The second component of the transformational programs then is really it's really about inviting a set of early adopter TREs to test, configure, and what we would hope then, assuming all successful, begin to adopt these new capabilities. I'm not sure if I need to talk too much more about that one. It's really about, in the end, the TREs are trying to service their users, the researchers. They need to be comfortable that these capabilities are fit for purpose, robust, secure, safe. So that's really what this is about. And then finally, it's about, can we actually do some good with these new capabilities? So assuming that we can take them towards production readiness, assuming, again, that we're successful in ensuring that TREs buy into these, they've tested them, they're sort of comfortable with adopting them, can we actually then support researchers to do cross-domain research using those capabilities? There's dedicated funding for each of these. So again, as we sort of go through, there will be more details about, funding mechanisms, opportunities, calls, etc. This is just the reason is we're still going through some of this with UKRI, but we will be communicating all of that as we can. But yeah, there is dedicated funding for each of these components of the program. Okay, that was the transformational programs. I thought, and this was a bit of a challenge, Darren sort of threw this down a little bit earlier when he was talking about, well, what does it mean for researchers? So sort of chucked this in quickly over lunch. So on the left-hand side, you've sort of got the three components of the transformational programs that I've just walked us through. And in the middle here is sort of very, very simple view of the researcher journey, the user journey, which is really, I want to find the data, I want to be able to access it, apply for access pretty easily, have access to the right environment with the right tooling, and then be able to do my analysis and take the results of that analysis out of the environment. So this is I think this is a pretty accepted sort of journey that we're talking about here. The transformational programs are focused on the access and the environment. So we're not focusing in DARE phase 2 on the discovery per se. We're not focusing on the analysis per se. It's really about how do we make the access in the environments, the TREs themselves, work better. And so what does that mean for researchers? Really, it's about faster, better services for federated analysis. And again, importantly, for a DARE UK scope perspective, it's about cross-domain research use cases. Can we do things faster with automation? Can we do it more efficiently with automation, or indeed partial automation? I think that one's also self-explanatory, but what does that mean for the researcher? Things happen faster. Things are not as expensive in your research grant. New research, AI models is the classic is the sort of the example that we have here, and you'll remember that's one of the specific capabilities we're talking about in the transformational programs. You know, there's new research methods, there's new research that we're trying to do, and how do we enable that within TREs for researchers, I should say. Less effort to move from one TRE to another. This is, again, if we can agree on common standards, if we can agree on common sort of specifications and move towards a common user journey across TREs in the UK. Not saying it will ever look exactly the same, of course, but if we can get towards a more common user journey, that means for the researcher, if you do need to move from one TRE to another, you understand the user journey. It's pretty consistent. And of course, reduction in cost for TREs. Can we be more efficient with the way that we stand up TREs? And can we just make more funds available for the actual research? So that was my attempt. You can tell me, you know, in the Q&A whether I succeeded there, but that's my pitch to Darren's question this morning about what does it mean for the researcher? What does it mean for our users? Okay. Talking about what we call the next generation proof of concept. So that was the second program of work. Again, very similar to the Sprint Exemplar projects that we had in phase one. And this is really about prototyping sort of next generation TRE capabilities that are emerging, capabilities that we didn't address in phase one, because I'm not pretending like DARE UK phase one addressed all the challenges that we have in the TRE landscape in the UK. So this is really space for new ideas, space for innovations. I'm not going to, won't say too much more on that. There will be more sort of details coming out as we go. The early testing of a national network of TREs. There is a version 2.0, the Federated Architecture Blueprint, which some of you may be aware of, that Rob is leading on. The idea really is to get that out there, begin to look at what kind of technologies might work for a national network of TREs, and do some early feasibility testing of implementation, but maybe plural, maybe not. It's all a little bit in discussion at the moment. So that's really what that is about. Again, dedicated funding for each of these. So, but each of these sort of programs of work have dedicated funding sort of earmarked for those programs of work. And finally, the community building engagement and standards. I think this one is probably the one which we all understand really well. I see the value in doing this just by attending today, frankly. You know, the purpose here is really just to provide headroom, provide resource so that communities can self-organize, so that they can, you know, share information, they can share good practice. And again, we can start to move towards building consensus around common standards, common principles. Again, I've sort of increased, I think, the outputs I've touched on already. Just again to say, there's dedicated funding for this, and there will be pretty significant funding, at least I believe, for community building here. And if you do want to talk to anyone about that, Balint is your man. You've seen him already. He's in the front here. So he's leading this work. So please do get in touch. That's pretty much it from me. The only thing I'd say here is, before I hand back to Emily, just to sort of take us through a closing and getting the Q&A going. If you do want to stay in touch, if you do want to stay informed, everything, you know, everything that we do, the announcements of funding opportunities, whatever it may be, we communicate all of this through our channels. There's the subscription to the newsletter. Do visit the website. There is a new one coming shortly. I'm looking at Wesley sitting at the back there. And yeah, just really, you know, a big thanks to this community, because you've been really supportive of the DARE UK work. And really, we can't do this without without the communities, without the work that's already been done. So we're really just, the DARE UK program is building on the backs of giants, I would say, in terms of the work that's been done over many years in the UK. So thank you to you all. Stay with us and let's get it done. Thanks.
Thanks, Fergus.
Slide is open for questions.
I just got one more slide.
Oh, my apologies.
It's the best one. DARE Phase 2, a new way of working. So I do very much want DARE Phase 2 to feel really quite different from DARE Phase 1. So DARE Phase 1 was very much around listening, understanding what the landscape needed, trying to, first of all, sort of start to bring people together. But we've moved on an awfully long way since then. And so I'd like DARE Phase 2 to look and feel quite different. So I went onto one of the AI image generators and I put in collaboration and transformation. And this is the warm, fuzzy image that we got back. It made me feel all lovely and warm and fuzzy inside, so I thought I'd share this and see if it made you feel a bit happier on a grim day in Newcastle. Anyway, so although Fergus just said, went through, there's dedicated funding for this, this is what this looks like, I don't want us to be viewed as just the funder. UKRI is the funder. DARE is a large program of work where we're trying to bring everybody together, have a range of different activities across that piece, and we want to work in collaboration with you. We don't want to just be viewed as the people who are giving out the money. We want you to come to us with new ideas and come to us with, could we create some new ideas and some new leverage funding in order to make a difference in this space. So we're not just funders. So very much wanting to work with you, partnership rather than sort of management, if you see what I mean, around these different groups. So as I say, if you do have an idea, you do think that there's a big program of work that DARE could help support or DARE could work with you on, please do come and reach out. And we're here. It was 6 o'clock in the morning when I wrote this. We are here to listen. That's a good pun. Come on, thank you. And how we can improve and help to meet the needs of the community. Let's do it. And then at that point, I will go on to these different ones. And I am very excited that we're going to have a new website coming out soon with all the information about DARE. Thank you. Now you can.
So Slido is open for questions, and so everyone online and here can.
Also questions from the room, I guess.
Yeah.
Could we put some lights on or something? It's really grim in here. Where did summer go?
This is summer.
Is there an indicative timeline on the pilots projects? One thing that we'd really like you all to do is, if we're sending out surveys about the gaps, the things that you'd really like to see as a community, please do take the time to fill in those surveys, because they can be used to influence what calls look like and what things come out yet. So we're needing to do some work with the DARE board around exactly the shape of that. But I think it's next year-ish, 25, 26 in terms of those calls.
We also have one question online here, which is, UK is in the UK name. Are you looking to join up internationally?
I'm happy to start. I don't know if M might have something to add here as well. I mean, we are a UKRI funded program, right? So our remit is really the UK. Now, we all know that science is international. So we've already, even if we look at the Entrust, the ESC Entrust project, even if we look at a couple of other initiatives that are happening internationally, of course, we have an interest. Of course, we are involved where we think it makes sense to be involved. But we are a UKRI investment. We are focused on the UK as where we're trying to do the work that we're trying to do. If you look at the vision and mission, the UK is at the forefront of that. But of course, it's caveated with science is international, and really what we're about is enabling science, enabling research.
Yeah, so just to echo that, I think the core DARE funds that we've talked about and the core sort of transformational programs, we've already sort of allocated what they would look like. And as you say, they're generally for UK collaborations. That doesn't mean that there isn't an opportunity for some leverage grants, bringing DARE UK in collaboration with other equivalent DARE UKs across the globe and leveraging more things. So as Fergus mentioned, the Entrust programme is building on a lot of the work that DARE has already done in terms of federation and in terms of the SATRA blueprint. And, that's a big EU initiative, and hopefully there would be many more to come.
Yeah, so you mentioned about setting up a test network of TREs. Is the goal there to involve as many domains as possible, or is it going to focus on kind of health and humanities, or is it, genuinely more cross-domain than that?
So there very much is cross domain, and we're really trying not to kind of just focus on health at all. Yeah, it will be lots of different data domains.
I mean, the only thing I'd add there, Darren, is that work, we do need to do a bit of scoping about what actually is sensible to do, and we might need to prioritize at some point, just given the resources we have, right? So there may be sort of a prioritization exercise to say, well, we're going to work with, maybe the mature is sort of the administrative data side, maybe the health, it depends. There's a bit of work to do there. We may need to prioritize, but of course the ambition is, it will have to be cross-domain, right? It has to be fit for purpose for cross-domain data.
And I'll just add there as well, the level at which that work is working at is at the network level. So really, really low level. So it's not really even at the data specific level. So it should work across all domains. Hello.
So following up on that, on the cross-domain, and in particular about the standards and the work you are intending to do in reaching consensus, best practice, and linking to Darren's presentation earlier, do you have a scope for the standards? When you say standards, what are you considering? Is this formats, or is it maybe at the network level and it's more protocols, or is it at the data level are considering up to, I mean, you did mention interoperability in your talk. Does it cover up to semantic interoperability? Yeah, if you could give a bit more detail on that.
Yeah, sure. So there is very much around how can we across TREs work on standards to help things. So that does go across many different types of standards. We're not so much focusing at the moment on the, as in the core transformational programs, are not focusing so much on the semantic data interoperability. We're more focusing on how do you do at a infrastructural level federated projects and things. That doesn't mean that some of the new sprint projects and things couldn't look at that, and that doesn't mean that somebody else coming along and saying, oh, we'd really like to collaborate with DARE on a project looking at semantic interoperability. Great. But at the moment, the sort of standards we're looking at is things like the SATRA specification, making that, more detailed, more use cases, reference implementations of those sorts of things. How do you standardize how you do a federated project? That's the sort of level we're looking at.
Thank you.
I mean, just to add one thing, I just add one thing to your question. I mean, part of, why we have the sort of community building sort of work program is actually to also surface, the standards that we're not necessarily going to tackle directly as part of DARE UK, as part of the core program work. It's to surface a lot of that work because in the end, there has to be sort of buy-in community development to a lot of these standards. Otherwise, you've just got another one. So it's that consensus building is really why we've got I think, very healthy resource for community building and for sort of working groups to tackle some of these things.
So if you wanted to do a working group on semantic interoperability, for example, then you could put in a case in order to create a working group or a special interest group around that. It depends what you guys want, right? This isn't sort of top down that we'll do this. This is very much around what does the community want to work together on, and where do you see most needs?
So we have another online, which is asking, is there anything you wish you could fund that you're not funding at this moment?
Absolutely. I can always spend lots of money. I think that there is a huge potential for a massive change in this landscape. At the moment, the majority of projects that happen are happening in one TRE without federation across all of these. Most TREs don't support AI. What we're doing is a step change to move towards that, looking at standards to do it, improving the sort of capabilities across this piece. However, I think you need some transformational money in order to make a massive difference in this space. And once we get up and running in terms of how you support all of these activities, I think the scale of the research and the speed of the research can be completely different. And so for me, if the government are looking at a national data library, and they're looking to transform the landscape here, well, we're already putting the building blocks in place for that. And I think that there's a huge potential to do a lot more than we're currently doing, and at a faster pace as well.
Thanks. Anyone in the room?
Could I might add one thing there. I mean, I think, inevitably there's always more that you would have loved to be able to fund. But I think there is also, we do need to recognize that there's a lot of initiatives in this space. And I think there is sort of an onus on not only DARE UK, but sort of the royal we, us in the room, those who are not in the room, to start working together a little bit more cohesively, right? And I think that's very challenging. And maybe this is also a challenge, somewhat upwards to UKRI and our funders as well. But I think we've got to live that before we can sort of challenge others to do that, right? So I think there is a sort of collective responsibility on all of us to try and work together, because there is resource in the system. We've just got to make sure we're using it as effectively as we can.
Hi. So faster, easier access to data sounds really good, and I'm absolutely all for that. But I think from a skeptical point of view, it's something that I hear or have been hearing a lot for years. It might just be working in government that this comes across all the time, and it's often read it or interpret it as a sort of a weakening of controls. So the weakening of the control for the access to the accreditation of the project, accreditation of the researcher, the information coming out of the environment. Now that faster, easier access to data sounds really good, but then it comes up against the sort of cold realities of the agreements that we've got in place with data owners and that are mandated by our own internal teams, security, and by legal agreements, the gateway that things come up against. So I was just wondering, how is DARE UK in phase 2 intending to address those sort of concerns, those really broad-reaching ones that sort of that set the restrictions on the front-facing teams, the people who deal with the researchers applying to do projects and applying to get things out of the environments? But I do think if it can happen, brilliant. All this sounds really good.
So I think that's a really, really good question. So if you look at the various different, so first of all, we are not trying to say, let's take away any of those controls. Those controls are there quite rightly to make sure that there isn't data misuse, that data doesn't fly around the place, that research projects are in the public interest. I don't want my data being given out all over the place and not being handled properly. It's absolutely and utterly key that we do that. What we're trying to do in DARE is bring in innovative solutions that still meet the data governance requirements, but do things in an automated way where possible to still give you the faster and better, but not trying to break the data governance rules or make them weaker or anything like that. So if you look at, let's say, some of the federation projects, the previous phase one federation projects were all around, well, how do you still adhere to the governance rules, but actually give the researchers the sorts of capabilities and things that they need without data flying around all over the place and lots of copies about data. And so they innovated on the technical level in order to provide those sorts of capabilities. At the moment, most TREs don't support AI development because you don't know how to check a model to make sure that it isn't actually disclosive when it leaves. So that new capability is also about saying, well, how do we support that new kind of research as well? So that's not just about better and faster, that's also about new capabilities. But if you can have automated tools to check an AI algorithm, then that's going to mean that there's an awful lot less hoops and checks and things that need to happen manually in order to let that out. So it's all about balance, but it's most definitely not about making it faster by, I suppose, just tearing up red tape. It's absolutely not about that.
I might just add, I mean, Emily's mentioned it, you know, it was explicit, there were explicit work streams in phase one for a lot of the projects we funded, which were essentially around, yes, they were, I suppose you'd call them technology innovation projects, but they had work streams around information governance, right? And in actual fact, many of them, they had those conversations with IG and the IG went, yeah, that's not really different from the rules today, so crack on. Now, just to say as well that in phase two, it will be mandatory for certainly the core programs of work and many of the other programs to have work streams on information governance and to be collaborating with, for example, at a strategic level, the Pan-UK Data Governance Steering Group. There are a number of IG groups, IG professional communities. So that kind of engagement will be needed because, again, we sort of got to do this together. And I think there is sort of a big onus on this community, and specifically the technical community, to sort of be able to explain better to the IG folk what it is we're trying to do, how it works, so that they can make an assessment and a judgment on whether that's acceptable or not. But that work's already been, some of that work has been done in phase one. We can do it. And so it will be mandatory in phase two that we do it as well.
And I'll just add to that, not just data governance work streams, but also PIE work streams as well. So they're absolutely core components of each of the different their work streams.
Perfect. Okay, there's one more online, and then to Chris, and I think that's the time we have. There will be some unanswered questions. Should I tell people to just contact you?
No, Fergus.
Perfect. So I'll just take this one online. Are you planning to implement any of the use cases identified in the DARE UK blueprint of federated TREs document led by Rob?
I'm sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, I'll start again. Are you planning to implement any of the use cases identified in the DARE UK blueprint of the federated TREs document, the one led by Rob?
I think that there's going to be quite a few exemplar projects, and we have a big program of work around federation, which will need to work across TREs and also then with some exemplars. So absolutely. I can't remember exactly the specific use cases in that version, the earlier version. Okay, fab.
Online, Rob said yes.
Cheers. Thank you. I guess just to make a comment on the previous question about reducing standards for data access. Interestingly, we did a thing with a public engagement workshop with Research Data Scotland recently on because we're trying to streamline some aspects of the Scottish methods. And one of the public members said that sounded like a nightmare. Can you not reduce it? Can you not make it easier to do? So I think we said no, but we do want to make it smoother and better for the specific process we were looking at. So it's interesting that sometimes the public maybe have a different appetite, but maybe we shouldn't be led by that. Anyway, my question is around, I guess maybe a broader question around sustainability. So all the things we're building here are long-term things. They're not research projects that last, 1, 2, 3 years, whatever. They're things that need to be lasting 10 years or so or more. So what's DARE's position on identifying how we make all these things that we build sustainable for the future of UK data research, and I guess more internationally as well?
So I think that's the job of the program of work that's building on SATRA.
Thanks.
That is that's looking at reference implementations and those sorts of things, and cost efficiency, and making sure that TREs can spin up really easily, and those and that is
cool. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Maybe slightly more serious answer to that question. I mean, it's a good question, Chris. I think, there is sort of in the vision of DARE, there has always been sort of a phase 3, right? Now, at the moment, that just says phase 3, right? That there's nothing sort of specific in there. And obviously, that's because it really depends on the work of phase 1, the work of phase 2, and how we progress, how the ecosystem evolves, right? And so there's sort of a lot of factors that might influence that. I think there is a real, sense certainly within UKRI, that they do want to find a way to do this consistently for TREs, for sensitive data research infrastructures. It is challenging, right? There's a lot of sort of challenges there. It is part of sort of the long view that I think we certainly have at DARE UK, and certainly that the funders have as well. Is there sort of flesh on the bone yet? I wouldn't say not really yet. But it is part of phase 2 in the sense of preparing for phase 3 and what phase 3 looks like. But we're going to learn a lot, sort of before we start doing that as part of phase 2. And it's obviously going to inform then what the next phase looks like.
Yeah, and I think, again, with a semi-serious answer, there is a challenge in this landscape, in that we're funded by UKRI. UKRI is made up of different funders, and those different funders have different funding models. So some of which are core funding of activity for a long time. Other TREs survive on cost recovery from various different projects. And if you're doing a research project that's crossing those different data domains, when there's different funding models, that's a real challenge in terms of how you cost for that, how that all fits together. I think also universities have historically been given significant funds and funded lots and lots of research infrastructure there. But as sensitive data moves into TREs, some of the traditional funding models will have to change to recognize that actually there does need to be significant funding into TREs in the longer term. So that again will be a change of model. So I think as a community, we're best placed to sort of come together and sort of influence in that regard, and work out how we can move forward. What I don't think we can do is continue with a proliferation of TREs, all of which start from scratch of hello world, building their infrastructures, and it costing a huge amount of money to set one up, and in terms of both processes and technical infrastructures, that's just not going to be sustainable. So how can we make sure that if somebody does want to build a TRE, you can actually do so at a fraction of the cost of the current sort of setup and things, and also maintain that quite cheaply?
One more point, maybe, because I would throw this back a little bit to Chris, and actually Chris on behalf of the Royal We in the community here, right? If we think about the funding and sustainability community working group that exists as part of this community, and I think Rebecca and I apologize, is it Lisa? I think it's Rebecca and Lisa who are the co-chairs there.
All right.
In some sense, that's a question I might throw to that working group as sort of input to DARE UK and a conduit through to the funders, right? So this is a challenge for all of us, I think, to look at DARE UK and go, well, it's all on sort of the DARE UK program to answer this question is, I think, a little bit naive. I think we're only going to be able to answer that collectively, right? And so there's a bit of a challenge throwing back to the community, this community, other communities of, well, how do we do this? How does it look today? How do we want it to look tomorrow? How do we get there?
Thanks. I think we're actually running out of time. So we'll probably do share outs and continue this conversation in all of our spaces that you are welcome to join: Slack, the mailing list. Please post your questions there. Keep the conversation going. Thanks very much for the presentation. The continued support. Simon will take us to the end.
You run around. Wants to say anything? It's just each group, just 1 minute summary.
Okay, yeah, and I can go around. Do you want to change this?
Yes.
Which one?
I'll sort it out. You go back to TV. Oh yeah, that's it. I need to refresh.
Remember to be in top in front of the camera.
Yeah, okay, thanks everyone for a great day. So I thought we'd just spend a few minutes for quickly doing a quick wrap up. Bear in mind people need to get home or to the pub more importantly. So, but I thought if any in the breakout groups wants to say something very quickly, just for say give a 1 minute summary of what you talked about today, you're very welcome to, but don't really have to. But so from the extended control group, does anyone want to say anything?
That's a no.
Okay, cybersecurity risks.
Anyone from any group actually want to share anything, or do you want to go to the pub? That also goes for online folk, by the way.
Right, funding sustainability. Yep. Satra. That's awesome. And finally, from the morning breakout sessions, does anyone want to bring up any sort of key points from their breakouts on accelerating digital science? Good. Okay, well, that makes my life easy.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, I say it is all HackMD. What we normally do is we'll go through the HackMDs, we'll clean them up, we'll remove all names, so don't have to worry about. So if it says something no, rude about the employer, don't worry about it. I just want to emphasize, please do get involved. So as if I've seen today, we're very much a community-run, grassroots-run organisation. And as you know, we've recently set up some working groups which already have some sort of key outputs. I encourage you all, if you can, to join a working group. That doesn't have to be an onerous undertaking. It doesn't mean chairing an onerous group. It may just be joining a meeting, say, for 1 hour every 3 weeks, or just commenting online on any docs that the working group has. If you do have a bit more time or the drive, then say, and have an idea for working group, please come to us. So we've already brought up the idea of an information governance. And as you heard from their phase 2, that's actually going to be quite key. Then as well as that, as you know, we're putting together skills, research digital technical professionals network, a skills bid, basically to get funding for ourselves to help run this community. So at the moment, it's entirely voluntarily run. That's why we're doing a big shout out to everyone to help out. If we do get a bit more funding, we can start being a bit more professional. We can also start handing small pots of funding out to all you if you have your own ideas, which is one of the cool things about this bid. I think that's everything, actually. Of course, as always, please fill in the feedback form. If you grab that QR code right now, because we do know that as soon as you leave, you always forget. We found that out after the last meeting. So we know there's stuff we can always do better. I mean, we know the hybrid breakouts maybe didn't work as well as we hoped. That's fine. Let us know. And especially if you have any solutions for how to do this better, do let us know. We're going to continue on the quarterly meetings. Our next one, again, will be online only in December. If you're not on the UK TRE mailing list, grab the link off HackMD or wherever, and do get involved. And finally, have a safe trip home for anyone who's going. If you are sticking around either for the rest of the conference, for the RSE conference, or just until the train, whenever that is, our plan is to meet in the 4th pub that is very conveniently just around the corner from the train station. If you're going to the train station, you're going to go past it anyway, so you might drop in. It feels we had to stick around to clear up. Hopefully, if anyone's heading to the pub, you can maybe take everyone else. If not, I just want to thank you all for coming today, make it a great event, and hopefully see you in the future.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks online. Feedback form also goes to you. Please do fill that in. We are keen to also make it better, make a better hybrid event each year. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
To the pub.
Thank you for what?
Okay. That your bag?
One of them is the one.
The orange, do you have an orange caramel? You're not a caramel person. Do you have an orange caramel?
Yes.
I've got an orange caramel. I nearly brought it here, but I brought another one.
Yeah,
I always, whenever I spot caramel wearers, I'm always like, you know
depending on the day, you can see me with double layer of Panama.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of the first one. And now I have a t-shirt, so if I wanted to, I could go 3 layers of Panama right now.
Yeah. They're my fave. That is, yeah.
Amazing.
Such good knitwear.
Yeah.
Well, the layers, you know, like the pretty different model of doing like.
Yeah, and now they went, I think they changed their model and they are owned by the NGO.
Okay, yeah.
So it cannot be sold, it cannot change its principles.
Yeah.
I mean, we cannot, it's just your name that is there. So if you wanted to give it and bring it to the next one, you know, because I mean, last year we collected them, because we had the lanyard and the and that's why we selected them back. This year, keep them.
Save the chat with the mouse.
Thank you for the announcement and for all the support, really. I like that you are quite supportive, but let us do our thing and are quite careful of that. So I appreciate that. I'm going to save the chat. Exactly. I mean, as it should be.
But anyway, thank you for both of you.
Thanks. Are you coming to the pub or do you need to run?
No, I'll be somewhere.
He's out in Leeds tomorrow. He's got the care meeting tomorrow.
How do I save the chat? I cannot find it.